Had the tone knob down. Well, thanks for joining me, everyone. As you might have guessed, my life has been consumed by Telecasters of late. Not a bad condition to have. I'm not sure if it's covered by my insurance. Seems something chronic, though. Chronic in a fierce way. So, having a lot of fun with tellies, including having to upload the same damn video 3 times. Once last night, then once I realized I had the guitar audio track on the wrong track in my video editing thing, so I was having the vocal limiter applied to it, which made the Mojo tones much louder and really squashed the Murrays. Uploaded it again this morning, and then I realized that the last 30 seconds didn't because of a technical thing. So, 3rd time's the charm. So, if you saw the video last night or early this morning on redoing the quiet coils of the Mojo tones, check it out again. You can really hear the differences now. No thanks to my ineptitude. There's so many hats we have to wear to do this, and I can be really good at all of them. But I can be really good at any one of them, but to be good at all of them at once sometimes is asking a lot, particularly when I'm doing it at 1 o'clock in the morning, whatever it was. How's everybody doing? We'll get to all the questions soon, and I've got the chat window up here in the browser. So I have the live chat over here on the left, and I've got the stuff where I can go back and get questions on the right. So I'll try to catch everyone. Hey, Jeff. I spent a good amount of this morning, Jeff, working on your lesson of this morning with the dominant arpeggios, having spent the last 3 days on the major 7th arpeggios. And it's this finger, man. I had a wood planer thing, and I have no independence, and I can't do the Vulcan salute or any of that stuff. And some of those fingerings reveal my weaknesses. But every day it gets better. And something I'm not the only one who's noticed this. It's funny, if you sit down and practice a thing for an hour, you get worse. If you practice it for 10, 15 minutes, and then go away for like 20 minutes and come back, it's like your brain's been percolating, all your muscles have been sorting out the new information, and the nerves are saying, oh, this pathway. And all of a sudden it's much easier. And particularly, you do something for 20 minutes, an hour later you do it for 20 minutes, then you sleep and you try it the next morning. So much more progress is made than just hammering away at it. So I'm sure most of the people here are more facile players than I am, so I'm not telling everyone something they don't know, but I'm pretty sure someone out there needs to hear this kind of stuff. I sure did when I was starting out. It's been an interesting week here at the old Sonic Audio Barn. I'm always struck by how people who are very successful in this industry tend to be really nice people. I had a chat with Lindy Fralin the other day. Really nice guy, generous of his time, knowledgeable, enthusiastic. I felt a kindred spirit. Brian from Top Hat. Once we get to talking to him about amps, it's impossible to get him off the phone, and I mean that in a good way. Talking to Ted Woodford, talking to all these people that I've had the chance to meet through doing this. I spoke to Keith Williams for like an hour the other day. It was supposed to be like a 3-minute phone call, and neither of us could stop. And so on that level, it's so nice. And then, so the very successful people tend to be really nice. And then the commoners, it gets discouraging, I don't know if they want their free back or what, but even the stuff that's valid, people will just choose the nastiest way to get it across. Like on that Moog video the other day, someone commented, "Oh, my FG, is it possible to tune those things?" Yeah, it needs to be calibrated, and I'll talk to the owner about calibrating it, but you don't need to attack everything. Not everything in the world needs to be a fight, because you're not going to win all of them if you go into it that way. I don't know. I'm just rambling. It's weird being out there in public. I'm sure Jeff knows exactly what I'm talking about. And again, if you don't know Jeff Meckerlane, go to his channel after this. Hell, go to it now, but you'll miss getting a chance to talk to him now. Beautiful guy, beautiful musician, great player, and a fantastic teacher. And I've started one of his courses, and once I feel that I've gotten, squeezed everything I can squeeze out of that, I'm going to be getting more of his courses because I need new ideas for playing guitar. This is not, the chats are for amp questions, and we'll get to those, and I appreciate everyone. But to me, it's still my channel, so I try to share my perspective. It's discouraging as someone who's been doing this a long time, who had an injury to his hand and has the beginning of arthritis, that I'm judged for not playing as well as the shredders out there. And there are people who just discount everything I have to say about amps because I'm not as great a player as they think someone on YouTube ought to be. I'm a hell of a lot better guitarist than Leo Fender or Jim Marshall ever were. And the pro players who come over here, whose amps I work on, they like what I have done because I can take everything that they do and bring it down to a simple, let's test this dynamic thing, let's test this the harmonic content thing. So I can isolate what they need and give it to them. And I don't get pushback from them, but it gets discouraging. Anyway, I'm not trying to complain, but it gets tiring having to be what people imagine a YouTube guitar channel should be, because that's not what I am. I'm a person who loves music, who knows a lot about music, but I can't always execute it because of my finger injury. I minored in music theory and composition. So the stuff in Jeff's lesson about dominant and minor and major seventh and augmented, diminished, all that stuff. I know all that stuff, but finding new pathways for my fingers to execute what I know, it's like knowing how to play pool versus being really good at it. And pool's just geometry, right? Anyway, let's get back to the questions. Let me start up to the very top here. Some stuff that came in before what I see here. JB, thank you very much for the super chat. He says, thanks for doing these. I can't add this to the screen because it's earlier than what I have here. Any downside to taking an amp that Leo designed for a 2x10, 2x10 and bumping to a 2x12 cab, assuming speaker impedance and wattage are correct, etc.? No. The Vibrolux with the 2x10 was both the 2x10 choice and the choice of a 28-watt output transformer are what Leo chose to do to differentiate it from the Pro Reverb. There's a mids difference as well. But basically, Leo wanted to have a whole lot of amps at different price points. And so by limiting certain features of the Princeton, after you heard your buddy's Deluxe Reverb, you'd want the Deluxe Reverb. After buying the Deluxe Reverb, you heard your buddy's Vibrolux Reverb, you want to buy that. After buying that, you'd hear someone play a Pro, you'd want that. After that, someone would have a Super or a Twin, you have to have that. They're all variations on the same thing, aside from the Princeton and the 60s Bassman. But all the other amps, the Bandmasters, the Vibroluxes, the Twins, the Supers, are variations to fit certain price points and things that Leo thought that the market needed and would support, and it turns out he was right. But if you have a 2x10, say a Vibrolux Reverb, and you plug it into a 2x12 cab, all of a sudden it sounds more like a Pro Reverb. And you're still going to be limited by that 28-watt output transformer, but you're going to have much more low-end, much less mid-range emphasis in the speakers, and potentially a bigger sound depending on the cab. A note on the 28-watt output transformer in the Vibrolux Reverb, while it was done to make it not as loud and hence not compete with the Pro, it does introduce its own sonic character where that output transformer compresses and overdrives in a way that a Pro or Super Reverb does not. So if you listen to old Roy Buchanan, a lot of what he's doing is, whether he knew it or not, down to how that Vibrolux Reverb reacted. That plus he had a particularly magical one of these with a particularly magical one of these. But more importantly, he had magical hands, mind, and soul. Bless his magical soul. Let's see. I'm catching up with everyone. All right, Daniel Brennan. Thank you for the super chat. He just got a brand new inbox Princeton 1x12 with a Jensen P12Q. The Princeton emits more heat than I'm used to with my other amps. Are they known to run hot, or could there be an issue? Thanks. I don't know what your other amps are. Princeton's all tube amps can emit quite a bit of heat. If the output transformer is not painfully hot to the touch, it can be a little uncomfortable, but you should be able to hold your hand on it without having to go, ow. Then you're fine. But, 6V6s in your case throw out a lot of heat. Rectifier tubes throw out even more heat. It can be normal, but they're designed to run hot. Unless it's getting so hot that you cannot touch the chassis or you cannot touch the power transformer, don't worry about it. Let's see. And all right, now I'm caught up on the left of the stuff on the right, so I'm going to scroll down on the left. So if people join in or there's something I really need to attend to, I will have a chance to see it. So now let me go through here and I can add things to the window now. Il Freeman 1. In experience with the Vox TB18C1, the Tony Birch models. No, I don't have any experience with that. I've had the Bruno, which I didn't like at all, but I've not had the TB18C1, so sorry. And amp covers, are they essential? I have the hardest time finding them. Thanks. They're not essential, but they're really nice. I know that Tukey Covers has a really big catalog of amps and cabinets that they already have the dimensions on. And even if they don't have that model, if you were to call Tukey Covers and say, this is the height, this is the depth, this is the width, and this is where the handle is, they might have something in their catalog that already fits. They can also make you one, and it's only about $70 to $110, depending on the size, usually. If I were gigging and I had an amp, I would definitely use a padded cover, and I like Tukey quite a bit. There are a couple other ones out there that are also very nice, but some of their names have escaped me at the moment. So this is not an endorsement of Tukey, but they are really nice amp covers. Chase and Tao, I'm glad I was able to help you last stream. Hey, Otto. Brad's got his coffee. Good to see you, Brad. Let's see. Rob F's got coffee. I got coffee. We all got coffee. All God's children got coffee. Raf, toilet repair and COVID. Did I miss something here? Huh. I don't see that one. But if you're if you have COVID and you have doing toilet repair, I empathize. I've not had COVID, but I've had a lot of friends, and my wife has had it, and I have done my share of toilet repair. There it is. Nothing like some guitar amp talk while replacing a toilet flush valve while isolating because of COVID. Well, a flush valve replacement is pretty simple. I think you got that. I'm trying to make sure there's nothing. Sometimes people will come in on the chat, Dave Friedman, Jeff, others, and they'll say hi. And by the time I see that they were here and I say hi, they're gone. So I'm trying to wear more hats. He did meet the Tony Bruno model, by the way, or Freeman. So I'll get to that. I would have gotten to that probably 20, 30 minutes from now. I need to get another screen up here so that I can see that stuff, and I'm not doing this to you guys. Or maybe I need to get one of the setups where it's all on a prompter. Not there yet, and that reminds me of something we'll talk about in a little bit. No, the Tony Brunos I think are kind of boring sounding. They're not quite a Fender. They're not quite a Vox. I don't see why they exist. They're built okay. There's nothing wrong with them. They're just meh sounding to me. And if you love yours, you're not wrong. If you love it, you love it. As long as it doesn't catch on fire. As long as it's not playing you for a sucker, I don't care what amp you use. If a lot of the stuff I put out there that people say, "Oh, he hates this stuff," I don't like when companies sell crap to people. But the Bruno era Voxes, the same construction methods as the custom classic stuff. A couple little issues that can happen down the road, but nothing worrying. So if you like it, it's great. If you don't, then you agree with me. I don't understand why it was marketed as Vox. Let's see. Hey, Colby Jack. I can look at both screens at once, Brad. It just looks really weird if I do it here. Should have zoomed in for that. Is that country or Western? Lou Wood says it's bad country, but I'm on the east side of the Mississippi, just barely. Hey, Alan Harvey. Is there octopus ears? Is there a best tuner for your pedal board? I have not tried all the tuners on the market. I quite like the TC Polytune 3. Some people have said that it can be finicky for them. I've not had it be finicky. I've had it be great. I find that if you want to use a buffer, it's not as good as the buffer that I used to make, but it is a good sounding buffer and it works really well. And sometimes you can find one in black. There's another tuner, not the Korg Pitch Black, but there's another tuner that's black. That might be a good choice for aesthetics, but I've not tried it. I just haven't tried all the tuners on the market. They change every 2 to 3 years, and the Korg Polytunes always worked for me. And I love the. Here's a plug for you, TC. I love the clip-on version. Also have the pedal version. Let's see, 1217 Productions. Where's a good place to buy a stranded cloth-covered wire that's easy to trim? Stranded cloth-covered wire, that's a little bit tricky. Mojotone would probably be the best bet for that, the wire that they sell for pickups. I'm not sure if they have it in all gauges and colors that you might need it. In most Fender amp repairs I use the cloth-covered solid core 22 gauge that Hoffman Amps sells. But if I were to buy specifically for guitar wiring, I wanted I think it's 20 gauge stranded cloth pushback. Mojotone's got some really nice stuff, and they also have some other wires I need to look into. They just started stocking good wires after I'd already found sources I rely on. Let's see. Matthew Pennington, thoughts on the Fromel Fender 68 Custom Deluxe Reverb modifications? He wants to make his amp more lasting and less buzzy. The Fromel won't fix anything that's wrong with that amp, because the Fromel is not fixing what's wrong with the amp so much as trying to make it visually look more like a modded 70s Fender or something. I'm not a fan of Fromel kits. The orange drops are absolutely the wrong caps to use on those circuit boards in the Fender reissues. The leads are, the diameter of the leads are wider than the diameter of the holes in the board, so people force them in and it just rips pads out, and those are heavy, large caps that don't fit. It's a bad way to do it. And even if you wanted to do the Fromel mods, you can get those same parts for less money from Tube Depot, buying individual parts and buying a kit. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's a IC brand 22 nanofarad or, that's this big, or an orange drop that's this big. It's still 22 nanofarad, 600 volts or whatever, and it's going to sound the same. If you want to know how to make the 68 Custom Deluxe Reverb quiet, I've got like 6 videos on it. Showing various levels of that, what the problems are, how to rectify them, why the amps are noisy, and if you look at those videos, aside from the ones I've gutted and rebuilt from scratch with turret boards, the ones where I've just modded existing ones, and they sound great. Check out the clips that Brian Lindsay did with his 2 that I did. I'm using Panasonic ECQ film caps, which are really good quality and fit on the board without doing any damage. But you have to be experienced at working on PCBs. You have to have the right desoldering equipment. You have to work at the right temperature. Otherwise, you're just going to lift pads. The real answer for most people is don't buy the 68 Custom, buy the 65. The 65 doesn't have all the stupid, and it only needs a few things done to be made reliable. The 68, they just take a 65 and butcher it at the factory. for more noise and more mids, and there are several different ways you can have reverb and trim on both channels. One of which is the noisiest. That's the one Fender used because it was the easiest. Let's see. Yeah, people can be just I meant to remove that click thing. People just don't act right. And people don't ever say those things to my face. It's a whole bunch of armchair keyboard warriors, and it's pathetic. And it's unnecessary. It doesn't make anyone make better music. If we're all here for music or guitar, some of us are here just to get chicks, and good luck with that. But Oh, robot songs. I don't let them ruin my day, but I do have feelings, and you wake up some mornings and you get 20 people telling you can't play, and you're like, motherfucker, let me chop off the end of your finger and damage this nerve, and then give you arthritis and see if you can play that C Vi chop. It's ridiculous. Thanks, Mitch. The Moog was fun, and I'm going to talk to the owner, who's a friend of mine, about letting me recalibrate it, which means that it would, in fact, play in tune all the way up and down. But even in its current state, it's got some nice character. Hey, Martin, solid state or valve rectification? What's your preference? I don't have any preference. Great things can be done with either. And there are solid state circuits which can emulate very well the response and feel, et cetera, yada, yada, and more importantly, voltage drop and current handling of a rectifier tube. And in a new build, that is my preference, is to emulate what people like, as what players want from a tube rectifier, without having the heat, increased chance of dying, because rectifier tubes do die a lot, and the current draw and the added 5-volt secondary on the power transformer. If I can build an amp that was solid state, that feels and sounds like it's tube, without all those drawbacks and added costs, that's a no-brainer. But I've never heard anyone be able to say, he's a good player, but he sure would sound better if he had a rectifier tube. I block some people, Brad. If I find that they're just beyond the pale unpleasant, I'll block them. I'll let people criticize me or naysay the things I say. I don't need to be here to be right, but some people are just useless. Clyde says, my new boost pedal is great with my Vibrolux. Is that a thing with Fenders and boosts? Well, not all Fenders are going to react to boosts the same way. Earlier in the chat, I was talking about Vibroluxes and the compression and overdrive that the underpowered output transformer gives those. Vibroluxes are really one of my favorite amps. They just have a certain thing that the other Fenders don't have. But if you're really looking for spanking cleans, they're not the choice. They're character amps. They have a little more character than the Deluxe Reverb, and they're just a little bit louder. Dying is easy, comedy is hard. That's right, Gooden. Let's see. Let's see. All right. Bottom Kitchen says, do you know anything about the Vox AC15 H1 TV? I see a few of these for sale for reasonable price. Yeah, they're kind of horrible. In premise, they're great because they've got the EF86 channel, but if you look inside it, it's got a big PCB on suspension mounts, and those suspension mounts often cause noise issues. But the main problem is on that PC are turrets, and those turrets are not mechanically connected to that board the way that a turret normally would be. They're just soldered to a very, very thin pad. And, if you do any rework on that amp, it's very easy for that turret to come loose from that PC, from the pad, because the pad will just tear off the fiberglass board. But also just from vibration, if you hit a pothole on your way to a gig, things can go wrong. I think they're very flimsy. I think the construction is bizarre, and I don't recommend the Heritage series at all, either the 15 or the 30. It's a shame, but the new hand wired is much better than the old Heritage. And as much as a fan of a EF86 as I am, you can goose a standard 12AX7 normal channel in a Vox with various pedals and get similar characters. You can hit it with a EP boost or a good overdrive pedal set for just the smallest bit of drive and a little bit of a gain increase and maybe a fairly neutral tone setting. Or you can even use if you have a treble booster. Some treble boosters have a variable frequency, which gives you a variable high pass setting. You just turn that down so you're getting a little bit of a thing from that, but you're not getting the big. You're not losing a bunch of lows. Kind of makes things wake up. There are a lot of pedals out there that are always used for certain things, and people don't realize that a lot of those same pedals can do magic if you use them very subtly. I think everyone knows that about the EP boost now, but a lot of drive pedals out there don't have to be overdrive. They just everything working in tandem can be a little important, small but important part in a cumulative process of getting a particular harmonic response out of things. Let's see. Shaolin Wolf, thank you very much, sir. Would a master volume make sense for a 1971 Bassman 50 head? And if so, what kind? Or am I better off just using pedals for 70s style low-gain rock tones? If you're going to add a master volume, there are two to use in a Fender circuit. You can either do the Larmar, which I've shown in several videos recently, which is probably the most transparent version that you can do in most amps, especially in amps with negative feedback. But if that is beyond your skill set, or if you have a 70s Fender which has the master volume, if you look at the schematic for 70s Fender, where the two 220K mix resistors come in, they just put a 1 meg pot and then take the wiper to the input of the phase inverter with shielded wires to and from. It works really well. The issue with the 70s implementation is that Fender usually put a bright cap on it, and that is pain. So take the bright cap off if you have one of those, or don't use one if you're building one. And if it's one of the push-pull pots for the pull boost, don't do the pull boost function because it sucks. But for most uses, if you're going to be doing a lot of turning it down, the Larmar is the best. If you just need to turn it down a little bit, the standard pre-phase inverter master volume is quite good with most Fenders. The benefit you would have of using a master volume in conjunction with pedals versus just using pedals is that almost every Fender amp has some degree of self-noise. And if you have a master volume, you can turn it down just until the self-noise is either inaudible or less audible, and you'll still have what most people are looking for as far as the level of an amp in the room. And then you can use pedals for overdrive on top of that, or even full-on distortion. So even if you're aiming for the same dB level, say pedal into the amp on 2 versus pedal into the amp volume on 4, but master volume turned down to 2 o'clock, the latter is going to give you a little more harmonic response from the preamp, but you're going to have a lower self-noise of the amp. So there's no one answer, but there are two good options that I think I explained pretty well. Sorry about this sniffle. The weather keeps changing. I've got sinus drip. That's enough. You don't need to know more than that. Hey, Christopher Sambuco. He says, what accounts for the more mid-range on the Princeton reverb since they have the same tone stack values and similar voltages? Is it the Cathodyne inverter no choke? It's three things. It's first of all, the speaker in a Princeton is a 10-inch speaker traditionally, and the 10-inch speakers don't have as much low end and high end as a 12-inch speaker, so you get a mid-range emphasis out of the speaker itself. Second of all, the cabinet in a Princeton, even a 1x12 Princeton, is physically much smaller, has a lot less internal volume than a deluxe reverb, let alone a larger Fender. And as the cabinet is smaller, it cannot develop as much low end. So you get the more mids and more lower mids, but not true fundamental out of a lot of Princeton cabinets. And yes, it's open back, but even open back cabs, the internal volume matters. Third, the Princeton's got a 6.8K mids resistor, as does the deluxe reverb, as does the normal channel on a super reverb, and a lot of Fenders that don't have a mids pot. If they don't have a mids pot, typically that fixed resistor is 6.8K. In a Champ, it's 15K, which makes them even boxier. And I find that was, again, going back to earlier in the chat, one of the things Leo did to make you want to buy the next amp up. It's partially that. It's partially because we're using different strings today than they were using back in the day, and our concept of the tone we're trying to get is different than the sound they're trying to get back in the day. But for a lot of Princeton owners, I will give them the option, if they don't want a full-on mids pot added to a reissue, I can put in the 6.8K, which emphasizes that boxiness, or I can replace it with like a 1 to 3K, somewhere in that range. I'll usually put a little 5K pot and turn it till they like it and measure it, and hey, you like a 1.5K. Because the sound of a twin reverb or a super reverb vibrato channel, which has a mids pot, it is a 10K audio pot, which means that when it is at 10, it is 10K. And when it is at about 8, it's 6.8K, roughly, which is what you'd have the mids in a Princeton. When it's at noon on a super or twin reverb, it's actually much lower. It's closer to 1K. And most people, when they play a twin or a super reverb, they turn the mids down to about noon, somewhere around noon usually, which gets them down to like 1K. So if you put a 1K where that 6.8K resistor is, or a 2K, your preference, you can dial that in. You can really decrease the mids even with a 10-inch speaker. And when the mids aren't as prominent, the lows that are there can speak a little more freely. It's all subjective. So it is not; those are the primary things in the Princeton which are affecting the mid-range. There are other differences in headroom and which frequencies are distorting or being emphasized, but that's beyond the scope of this. This is why I never answer everyone's questions, because I try to answer each one pretty thoroughly. Anyway. Hey, Richard Clark, he's got JJs and a 5E3 after about 50 hours, starting to hear some ring. JJ 6V6S's become microphonic combo amps. They just do. All 6V6s that are currently produced are prone to becoming microphonic in combos, but the JJ more so than others. The three that I like better than the JJ, and this is not about JJ the brand, but specifically the 6V6S. I like tongue sol, I like Electro Harmonics, and I like TAD. But the TADs I've had some issues with, but that might have been a batch. I've had others that were just fine. And you won't always be able to get the EH or the tongue sol due to Putin being an asswipe. But any 6V6 can be microphonic in a 5V3. JJs are just the most likely to. I have not had a chance to try the double mica 6V6S. I probably will at some point, Brad, but I've not sought it out. Chris Harrop, yeah, I'm not doing any more Maces in the future because life is short, and I want to have positive thoughts, and people People will see a video where I document everything that goes wrong all the time in the most common models for foreseeable, predictable, known reasons. And they say, yeah, but I've never had any problems, or yeah, but I love it. Or then they start attacking me because I'm the messenger. And I just don't want to deal with it. I don't like them. I don't think they sound good. I don't think they last for shit. I think they are taking advantage of their customers. And this is, Brad and I have talked about this. We grew up reading the guitar magazines, the Guitar Worlds, the Guitar Players, and with those big glossy, sometimes 2-page ads from Mesa Boogie all our lives, just being hammered in that you wanted the best, you got the best, And then we started doing this for a living, and we'd get a Mesa in, and we'd open up and this Road King's like $7,000, and it was built by a moron. Who the hell decided to put 20 1-watt resistors in a row versus one resistor of the suitable current and power handling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why are those traces so close together? Do they actually know what a pad is? It doesn't have to be, literally the size of a pinhead. They're just so bad, and I'm tired of it. So I'd rather work on good things. I don't have any opinion on the Electro-Harmonix MiG-50. I assume that they are the old Sovtek MiG-50, but built with Western parts, so I have high hopes. But for $800, I'm afraid some corners will have been cut, and until I see one, I won't know which corners were cut. And so I can't, I don't expect much, but I'd love to be wrong. Thank you, Jolly Bobby Goer, Bobby Yoger. Jolly Bobby Yoger, your name gives me fits. I love it. Thanks for the amazing content. Well, thank you for being easily amazed. I try to make things interesting, but I'm working with what I got here. He's a beginner amp builder. He's starting with a Rob 5E3. Any non-obvious tips to share? And do I have schematics for an Orion Apollo 2 head? I do not have any schematics for an Orion Apollo 2. I don't know anything about that model. I'm going to be building a 5E3 for the giveaway that we're going to start doing very soon. And if you want to follow along that series of videos, I'll be showing everything pretty much that I do in that. I was expecting to do that giveaway 3 weeks ago before I hit 50K. It's technically a celebration of the channel reaching 50K. But my daughter got sick, so January was pretty much a wash, and I'm still setting up the page on the charity website to get everything going, and I will be making full announcements on that. But part of that, we will be building an app that will be given away on the channel, and it's going to be my take on a 5E3 Deluxe. And you'll see me building it and the decisions I make, and I'll explain what I'm doing and why and all that stuff, literally from the grounds up. So stay tuned for that. Hey, Jake, if you have a high watt, I would, how often should you have it serviced? If you're going to be using it for all gigging and recording, you should take it to a really good tech that you trust for an evaluation to see if it needs anything before you take it out on the road. Because high watt has had very different eras of construction, and I'm unfamiliar with the 95 permutation, some of which are pretty much bulletproof, others of which have had some questionable construction methods. And so I would get a tech to go through it and say, yes, this thing is ready for the road, or no, this thing is one pothole away from being a fire hazard. Get all that sorted out. At which point, is if it's biased correctly and you have control over the voltage being fed to it, you should be pretty good, with the exception that tubes can wear out. And if you're using current production tubes, they could last 6 weeks, 6 years, or 6 decades, and there's no way of knowing. But a high watt, if it's babied, is a pretty reliable thing. The input jacks are a little bit flimsy over time. This is blasphemy, but the input jacks that they use, I find mechanically weak. I often will replace them with an Amphenol or a Neutrik stereo, just because the stereo has a little more retention on the cable. And especially on a high watt, make sure that the output jacks have good cable retention, because if you lose your speaker cable and you lose $600 worth of tubes as a result, Yikes. Maybe a basic question is divided by 13, 2x12 with 8 ohm speakers wired to their own jacks. So you have two 8 ohm jacks. Have two output jacks. Can I set the impedance jack to 16? Correct? No. You want to set the impedance to 4. You'd be running the two of them in parallel. So it'd be 4 ohm load on the amp, not 16. 16 would be if they were in series. Bojan Perko says, why does your work seem like wizardry despite using standardized man-made components, whereas Ted's work seems logical and accessible despite using unpredictable natural materials? I think it's because my wand is much bigger. I can't answer that because I don't see that. I see no wizardry on my channel. I am doing mostly Electronics 101 thoroughly. To me, what Ted does is the magic, the deep magic. He's just so damn good. And seriously, he will pose a problem like this neck needs to be reset, but someone in 1975 used epoxy and we can't do X, Y, or Z that we normally do. So what are we going to do about it? He will often come up with this solution. And I will pause his videos at that moment and try to think of what is the best way to do this. And then when I press play, he's come up with something so much better. And, he's been doing this, specifically the woodwork, for 30 years, where to me, a lot of what he's doing is concepts I understand, but I don't have the practical application day to day. To me, he's full of wizardry. But my wand is still bigger. Let's see. Bojan, I don't know anyone in Luxembourg. I know a guy in Switzerland, if that's not too far. Brad, our buddy in Switzerland. Yeah, Paco Casanovas. Yeah. Brad's got you there. Michael Matson, hey, I'm glad you made it. I don't know what the Deluxe Vintage Modified amp is. I've not ever heard or seen that, so I can't tell you if it's worth $650 or not. Bartell Amplifiers, Mark Bartell, TRS. Mark makes phenomenal amps. If you have the money and you like the sound, then that is a lifetime choice. That is a great amplifier. If you don't have the money, there are other amps which can make great music too. And if you have the money, but that's not the sound you're looking for, then that's not the amp for you. It's just like anything. But Mark does truly insane over-the-top quality for very logical choices. He's very particular about things that are important to him, which are also important to me. And I really admire his work. And if the sound of one of his amps makes your toes curl up and your wallet can withstand it, go for it. Beautiful Rolls Royce of amplifiers. Yeah, he's got a Polytune Mini Noir. I need to get a Noir because I've just got the white one and it's the only white thing on my board. Let's see. Rob is shopping for a bassman. The ones near him have corrosion on the transformers and chassis. Lack of corrosion or buying in person? What was most important? I don't worry about rust on a transformer because the transformer ends, the interleavings, will rust, and they're kind of immune from it, and some people even says it's good for the transformers to rust. I worry to a degree about rust or corrosion on a chassis. If it's just patina, I don't worry about it. But, if you look at that really rusted out bassman where I had to do the extreme stuff, that was a $1,400 repair. I don't recommend it for most. Buying in person versus buying online unseen, it depends on the reputation of the seller. If you're ordering something from, say, Carter Vintage or Rudy's in New York, you know that they have a reputation. Mike and Mike's over in Seattle, Emerald Guitars, Chicago Music Exchange, and some of those are going to be some of the most expensive options, but you know that they have techs and they stand behind their stuff, and it's not a fly-by-night thing. So either buy in person or buy very reputable, because otherwise you're taking chances. That's my advice. You can take a gamble on reverb, but it depends on how comfortable you are gambling and what the price of that amp is as a proportion of your income. Hey, Blast Duman. Hi-Fi Blast Duman. Duman. I am having a pretty good day. I hope you are too. At least pretty good. I think the bass line should be pretty good, and feel free to go up from there. He's got a Marshall 5900 watt Plexi and an all original Fender Blonde Bassman. Couldn't be happier. Next purchase, Fry at Power Station. You're just bragging, man. You're just bragging. I hope you love them, and I hope the 100 watt doesn't make you go deaf. Hey Randy, I've had Polytunes for years, but anything can break, and TC stuff is not the best built, but it's not that expensive. Peterson's much more expensive. Petersons are great, but they're physically larger, and they're slower to use on stage. If I were doing nothing but guitar setups, I would have a Peterson. It's the most accurate thing you can have, but something that's accurate enough for intonation, but quick enough to use for performance. I think the Polytune is great for $70, something like that. Stu Mac has got a lot of stranded wire matte fields, but that's because Stu Mac is kind of partnering with Mojo Tones, so I think there's a cross-pollination there. Let's see. I'm going to go to the other room and blow my nose because I feel like I'm just on the verge of doing a snort, which is just going to be revolting for everyone. So let me do a short break. I'll be right back. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. That was indeed a snort break. I didn't see that one coming. Michael Padilla, thank you very much. I just saw the super chat. I will be getting to that. I really wish I had two of me. I wish I could do the responses and then see what people say back in real time. I do go back and try to read all the comments after these, not out of ego to listen to my voice, but to see what I missed. That's the downside of being the guy on this end of the cameras. I don't get to participate in the chat fully. I mean, I do get money out of it, so I guess that part's nice. But let's see here. Switzerland's like 6 hours drive away. Well, it's a lot farther drive for me. I just shipped an AC30 from here to Asheville, North Carolina, so I'm not afraid to ship amps. But if I also had a custom box made for it, and the custom box was $50, and it's worth every penny to make sure that it's double boxed and it's got foam inserts and everything is cut just so, and it cannot move around, and all the corners are protected. I get amps shipped to me in just shocking condition because of really bad no-brainer choices people made. And then they always are like, why do you want to charge me $35 to $50 for the box to ship it back? Because the box you shipped it in, it's got holes in it, man. And it's worth it, trust me. And I don't make any money on that. I take it to a local guy who makes shipping boxes, and he does a great job. Yeah, the Peterson Strobo Stomp is great, but they're very, very pricey in comparison, and they're beyond what most people need. But there's nothing wrong with them. The Fryette Power Station, I've only heard great things about it, but I have no direct experience with it. I know I trust Stephen Fryette on that, and I know that Dave Friedman likes them, and I know that Jeff McElwain likes them very much if he's still with us. So their word is good enough for me, but I've not played with one in person. Dean McCaskill, it's the endless question. I love an AC-15. Should you get the blue speaker? You don't care about the money. It's worth the time. Speaker you prefer? Well, earlier this week, I put up a video. I called it Vox Fest. And one of the things in that video is you get to hear the same AC-15 custom that I modified. So it doesn't sound like a stock one, but it gives you a sense of it through the blue, the greenback, and my ET65. Now, my ET65 has got a lot more playing time than the other two, and that blue was brand new. There are other videos on my channel. One's called Tone Hang with Steve, where you get to hear Steve Selvage playing into his modified AC-15, the one I did for him, which is a greenback and sounds great. And there are various other things on the channel where I've compared the blue to the black and blue, and various amps to blues versus ET65s. No one can make that choice for you, but your best bet is to find someone who has the blue speaker, and you can run it as an extension cab into that, external, because you got the external and extension jacks on the back of your AC-15. See what you think when you play it through what you've got, which would probably be the greenback, versus the blue. Unless you have the AC-15 Custom Classic, in which case you have the Wharfedale, in which case almost anything on the planet aside from the C12K would be better. Yeah, Bojan, Brad and I are members of a tech group which has members all over the world, but not all the techs in the world are on that group, and not all the techs in the world are on the internet. And so I think it's pretty cool that you're asking a guy in Australia and a guy in Memphis about techs in Luxembourg, and we're able to say, well, we know a really good guy in Switzerland. We're getting there. But I know like 3 guys in England. I know a guy in Switzerland. I know a great guy in Denmark. I know people all over the globe. It's like the Flat Earth Society. We have members all over all around the globe. I messed up my joke. Let's see. I have not looked into digitally controlling pots, sorry, because digital stuff has moved so far, so fast. Keeping up with that would be a full-time occupation. I know in general, what's the best way to put this? Usually people don't do digital control of pots anymore. Where it's not like you hit preset 7 and the pot turns to 2 o'clock. Usually the stuff done today is that you call up a preset and it loads a parameter in the circuit, and then if the pot is turned at that point, the pot is just giving a control voltage in either direction, which tells it to adjust that parameter, and maybe as soon as it turns a little bit, the circuit recognizes, oh, I need to move this from 10 o'clock, the preset 10 o'clock to the 2 o'clock that it's currently at. So when you first call up a preset, the knob positions aren't moving, so the knob positions don't reflect what's actually in the preset. So I don't think that too many people are investing in digital control of physical analog pots anymore. But most of them do it so that as you turn the pot, a light will come on when you match the stored value in a preset. Bottom kitchen, yeah. I love the sound of a Princeton with a 10-inch speaker for certain things. I mean, listen to Jim Capolongo. It's beautiful. Bass isn't always what we need in a musical context, but it's like a Princeton or a Champ with a stock speaker. You're only hearing a part of what the amp puts out. You're not hearing the full frequency. So it's nice occasionally to have a reality check. And the answer is really just to have a really nice Princeton. If you have a 1x10 Princeton, get a 1x12 extension separate speaker cab. If you have a 1x12 Princeton, get a 1x10 speaker cab. You have choices because you can buy a 1x10 speaker cab with a good speaker for $200 to $300, and just you can use one or the other or both, and you move the mics wherever you want and be able to get a whole bunch of different sounds for not too much money. If I were to design a single channel amp of my own, I wondered how it would be like. It really depends on what the owner wants, what the client wants. I can make almost anything. As far as single channel amps, what I want, I'll invariably end up giving another channel just because I've got a spare triode and room for it, and I'll try to do something simple but useful. But I don't know. It's not like I have one concept of what an amp should be. There's so many wonderful different sounds out there, and a lot of the circuits people think are that's just that or that's just that are so much more once you really spend time with them. You like I mentioned, just changing that one resistor in a Deluxe Reverb will make it sound much more like a 22-watt twin, or a few changes in a Princeton. You can make them much more flexible than people think. People think an AC30 just does like early Beatles things, but no, it's also 10 Years Gone. It's also Queen. It's also Radiohead. It's so much more. It's Tom Petty. It's and listen to that Tone Hang with Steve video. Sounds phenomenal for blues and rock. If you want to do channel Jimmy Page, you get maybe a soul bender into that and a wah and go, and you're at 15 watts and you won't get evicted. But you can still wear the dragon pants. It's totally fine. Let's see. Saeed, when are you going to make some more pedals? I'm probably not going to make any more pedals. It's just so much money and time to make so little money back and not have control over the process. The company that I used to use for custom enclosures was bought out and then no longer doing small runs. And I don't know. I make more money out of amps. I'm more interested in amps. I don't miss the days when I'd sit up until 3 a.m. bending 1,000 diodes. It's just, it's one thing to design a pedal and then have robots make it, and then you just pocket the change, pocket the profits. But getting to that point is tricky. I know some people who are in the pedal game who've gotten to the point where they design it, they test it, they're made, they're shipped, they're distributed, and it's a business proposition rather than them doing all the work themselves. I may talk to some of them about some licensing, some of my designs, or at least the Telos, which is the one that people most want. But we'll see. But I don't think I'm going to be getting into making them myself again. Are metal film resistors noticeably quieter than metal oxide? Dale Rouse asks. 4-plate resistors. I built a single channel AB763 with too much hiss above F5 on the volume. The hiss comes from V1. Metal oxide's usually just about as quiet as metal film. And I'll tell you, on a AB763, you shouldn't notice any difference in hiss between metal film, metal oxide, and carbon film. And in fact, you should be able to get very quiet with above 5 on an AB763 with carbon composite. There are just going to be other factors in play. If the hiss is coming from V1 and AB763, V1 is the channel used for the normal channel. That is traditionally the quietest channel in the circuit because there's no reverb on that channel. It's the reverb channel that adds a bit of additional hiss. That Bandmaster I had on the channel the other day that'll be finished soon, that doesn't have the reverb circuit. Both channels are dead quiet, and they have carbon comps from 1966 in the signal path. So there's something else amiss with your amp, and it could be DC in the board. Well, if you built the amp from scratch, it could be lead dress. It could be you need to do some shielding wiring. I can't say beyond that. But, it could be that you have a bum resistor somewhere. But metal oxide and metal film at these voltages and currents should be interchangeable. Thanks, O. I love having you here. All right, we're right at 1 hour, and we will get back to D-Mac's question about the Marshall Studio line. And hey, Wes, just saw you're here. And we're going to take a 7-minute break for those of you who've not been here during the live streams before. At the top of every hour, roughly, I take a 7-minute break. We can all stretch our legs, get some more coffee, get a sandwich, whatever you need to do. And I'll see you guys back here in a few. Let me see what time it is as I do this. All right, we're going to come back a little bit early from that break. And before we get back to the questions, I'm going to give you a little bonus channel content for you guys. If you watched the video on this Telecaster last night or early this morning, I urge you after this to watch the newest re-uploaded version of it, where you can really hear the differences. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this chat, I had a limiter engaged on the guitar channel that I didn't realize when I did that last night, and it makes a huge difference. But the owner, Hal, came over this morning about an hour before the chat started, and you know, I have been able to make these Mojo tones much better sounding than they were. But he played this, then he plugged in mine with the Murrays into the same amp, and the Murrays are just so much more louder with more harmonic content and dynamics, so much more dynamics. You know, it's like a 3-second choice. So, well, he loves this guitar, and he has 3 Telecasters. He ordered, after last week's session with the Lawlers and the Murrays, both a set of Murrays and a set of Lawlers. So the Lawlers arrived first, so tomorrow maybe these are going in here, and the same wiring will work with the Lawlers as worked with the Murrays. Has worked with the Mojo tones. And then in his yellow Telecaster, which has the Fender Yosemites in it now, the Murrays are going in there. Now the Yosemites are pretty good sounding pickups, I gotta say. But to my ears and to Hal's and to Steve's, they were a very specific Telecaster sound, very much a late 60s Don Rich kind of thing. If you're doing a Buckaroos tribute, that would be a great set of pickups. But the Lawlers and the Murrays, both in different ways, just killed. And, you know, someone posted today, just get Fralins and don't worry about it. Fralins are also great pickups, and I had a nice talk with Lindy the other day about some pickups for my casino. So some Fralins are forthcoming, and I've got a Fralin 5% underwound in my precision bass, my Squire P bass, and that magically transformed the sound of that Squire. So yeah, I have great love for Fralin and Lawler and Murray and lots of. I mean, Duncan makes good pickups. DiMarzio has some that I like. I don't like all of them, but when you make so many different pickups, there's going to be ones that don't work for me. And I'm sure you have the same experience. But I like to reward smaller companies. I don't think the world needs me to tell them that Seymour Duncan exists. And I don't think my opinions are going to help or hurt Seymour Duncan's sales. And Fender's got some good stuff as well. This is not these are the only choices possible, but among the small brands, Lawlers and Fralins I quite like. And I've got a set of bare knuckles I've been meaning to put into my 335 for forever, but I just have not yet. All right, DMAC says, with those Marshall Studio line of 20-watt amps, is the problem more too high price for build quality or just badly built in general? If they were DSL 40 price, would it be better or no dice? That's the whole crux of the issue, is that Studio Vintage 20 is like $1,900 in the United States, and it's like $800 in Europe, 800 euros. And right now the euro and the dollar are roughly equivalent, which is just ridiculous for that to be an $1,800, $1,900 amp in the States. It's just not a good amp at that price point. To me, it's built exactly the same way as the Origin series. In the Origin series, you can get for $700 all day long. If they were selling the Studio Vintage for the $700, well, it's got a better cab and better Tolex, so bump up $50, $60 for that. You know, really? Which is more in line with what they cost in Europe. I think it's either a distribution thing or they think Americans are dumber than they are, which I don't appreciate. I want people to know exactly how dumb we are, but no dumber. It helps if you don't watch the news for that. No politics on here, I promise myself. It's hard sometimes. Jason Widener, I would probably not make a how-to amps work vid or series because Uncle Doug has covered that so well already. That's there, and Rob Robinette's got all that covered. And I don't feel the need to repeat content just to have my version of it, my take on it. I do certain things, like I've done videos on how Fender tone stacks work and such, and Marshall gain circuits, and I went way in the weeds on the Randy Rhoads one-wire mod and all that, and how to make it actually work musically. But so very specific instances, I do things like that, but I see it as in addition to the body of work that Uncle Doug's already done. I don't need to rebrand the wheel. Have you ever been to? No, but I've been to me. He just picked up, D-Tune just picked up a Mint Marshall JVM 205H 50 watt head. Any thoughts on reliability? Thanks. I'm trying to remember. I think I had the JVM 410H here. Be very gentle with the pots, because they're the tiny little green square back ones which are not robust. And if it's like the JVM 410, the front PCB is held on to the front panel by little compression standoffs, like brass or steel compression standoffs. And the PCB can actually pop off of those or partially off of those, in which case the buttons, when you push the button, it puts force on that. It can make the PCB come loose. I would say every 6 months, open it up, carefully blow it out with some compressed air, inside and out, and make sure with the amp unplugged and discharged that board is solid. And if the board is beginning to come loose from one of those standoffs, you can very, very carefully take a very small, flat-headed, hardened steel screwdriver, and with the board pulled off, just kind of there's a little crosshatch in the end of the metal standoff. Just slightly nudge it so that it expands out again, and then put the board back, and it should snap in place and be pretty solid. That's that, and maybe every 5 years, very carefully, one at a time, disconnect the quick connects, put a little drop of isopropyl alcohol there, let it evaporate fully, and then put it back. Beyond that, tubes wear out, but they're built a lot like they're built okay for the price point. I see why they were able to keep the price low, because otherwise, that many features, that'd be a $4,000, $5,000 amp. Just treat it cautiously. Wrong button, sorry. Yeah, good, but Tony Iommi also played with 7s or 8s, and he's just playing pentatonics, and I'm trying to, I can play pentatonics, I'm just trying to do something more complicated. I don't think he uses his pinky at all. I'm sure I just pissed off a bunch of Iron Maiden fans. A couple good riffs, but I'm not a big fan. I have been to Gruen Guitars in Nashville. It makes me feel how poor I am. How about Fender Harvard compared to Vibrolux? We're talking to the Tweed era. They're very similar amps in general. Or am I thinking of the Tremolux? No, the Vibrolux is just the Harvard with the added tremolo circuit, I'm pretty sure, or vibrato circuit. Sorry, Leo. If you turn the vibrato circuit off of the same amp, I like both of them very much. Jimmy Mack, you better hurry back. He says, do you have a favorite method for getting 2024 and 1987 Marshall sounds from the same build? I have a method for doing it, but it doesn't give you the authentic 2024 sound. I think it gives you a better 2024 sound. I move the volume pot, which becomes the what's the best way to put this? In a 2024, I added additional gain stage. I don't do the JCM 800 2024 thing. I added additional gain stage in front of a stock 1987 or 1959 input channel, which means that the volume is in a different location, and the gain structure is different. I can get those sounds. I've got some older, some of the oldest videos on the channel. I've done that where I'm switching gain stages, and it does that. To me, it gives the authentic, just call it JTM, the 87 and the 59 sounds, but you have an additional gain, but it doesn't have the cold clipping, and it doesn't have the bright and kind of harshness of the 2204. And some people will love it, some people hate it, but most people who've played it really love it. I think it's the best amp that Marshall ever made. And maybe someday I'll make one for someone again, but it's just time. Yes, Richard Beardsley, late 70s Silverface twin reverb, even with the work necessary, is a better purchase than a new reissue. The new reissue twins are pretty good amps, and given how everyone wants Princeton's and deluxe reverbs, a used twin reverb reissue can actually be a pretty good bargain. But so can a late 70s twin reverb. You can find them sometimes for $700 to $900 just because no one wants the weight and volume. And it can take $400 to bring one back to life. But at that point, it's not tubes maybe additional. It's such a good amp, and it's so easy to get for someone like me to go in there and say, let's get all the excess wiring out, and let's undo the too large input cap on the phase inverter, which gives it too much low end flub, and let's take the bright cap off the master volume and do a few little things to make it its best and get rid of all the DC and the built-up wax on the board. At the end of that, to buy a brand new amp that was built as well as that would be a $5,000 proposition. So, don't think of it as you're spending a lot of money resuscitating late 70s twin reverb. Even if the cab's in bad shape and those baffles can get weird and the front grill cloth frame can get weird, the dimensions can go into a new cab. You get a new cab for that thing for like $350, $400. You're really saying, I'm getting the core of a two-rock for $800. So if you end up putting $1,200 into the amp total, you're ahead of the game. Richard, I'm sorry to hear that you had some finger damage. I'm glad that you went the way of Django. I have not been able to Django my way through that. Hey, well, that's weird. Someone's selling the covers to the Excalibur 15 on eBay. Tukey does have the pattern for that. It's in their catalog because I gave it to them because we got one for the first one. And if I am able to make more, that'll be out there. So someone must be ordering them from Tukey and then selling them on eBay, or just have an eBay listing. And if someone buys it, then they place the order with Tukey. That's weird. Let's see. Bojan, I've got a couple of videos on Tone Kings on my channel. Rather than go through a 30-minute reply now, go watch those videos and you make up your own mind. Let's see. I've not tried the Gremlin. I answered a question about the Tony Bruno series. I don't care for the Tony Brunos. Not that they're badly built; they just sound meh. Zapruder Pedro. No, a 6L6 will run 450 just fine. 450 at cathode bias, that'd be a trick to pull off, though. I'm not sure if you could find maybe some permutation of power transformer will let you do that. Typically, you'd have a lower plate voltage if the 6L6 is biased at the proper 90 to 110% range for cathode bias in a single-ended. But yeah, the tube won't have a problem with that, but that's going to be drawing an awful lot of current from a power transformer. There's a reason people went to push-pull as soon as they could. Hey, the Line 6 Spider, any amp with Line 6 on it is pretty much built like crap. I'm sorry. You know, it depends on what you need. It's like the Catalyst. It's built like crap. It's also dirt cheap and designed to be replaceable. It is it's going to be in landfill, but maybe it does what you need it to do until then. And it's, I've gone into this in depth in other videos, including the Amps Under $500 video. But the Spider 2 and the entire Spider series is one of the least good sounding amps that they've ever made. And that's saying quite a bit. I've had a few in here. My kid was here this weekend. He brought his Katana 50 over, Mark II. Sounds better. If you're in that neighborhood. In fact, there's John Nathan Cordy the other day had a good video on the issue with people using modelers, is that no one at a professional level seems to. But he makes some good points in that video that the Katana 2 head is probably the better version, the 100 watt. It has built-in 5-inch speaker that you can use for practice, but then you can use with a better sounding, better built extension cab and just carry the little head around for backup if a tube amp goes down live. But of the various inexpensive modelers, both having played them and knowing how they work, I think you're getting a better sounding, more flexible rig with the Katana. Hey, PF, I was glad I was able to help you with the 2204. What was the issue? Any suggestion for a stereo tube power amp like Mesa 290 without the Mesa stink? Thanks again. I have not kept up with separate tube power amps because that people just don't tend to be using them very much. Some of the old VHTs were really good. Some of the old PVs were quite good. I think the old PVs, the classic 50 dual thing, or they had 100, I think it was a better built amp than the Mesas. But it's just not a world that intersects with mine very often. I would contact Dave Friedman or some of the other LA guys, LA Sound Design, etc., and see what their clients are liking these days. And there's also no problem going solid state for that. You've got a couple of Tone Masters. The Creamback, the Neo Creamback that it comes with, that's a really good sounding speaker. The Neo C12K is a Neo version of a bad sounding speaker that authentically sounds like a bad sounding speaker. The ceramic C12K is terrible, but the Neo is really nice. But you can put any speaker in there that's 65 watts or higher. Assuming you mean the Deluxe. I don't know which model you have, but typically they're going to run it multiples of 65 watt speakers in those, or 60. Hey, JP's Underdog Guitar Repair. He's got a Fender Super Twin non-reverb in his shop. The power transformer appears to wound hot. Can I modify the solid-state rectifier to drop plate voltage? I don't know what you mean by wound hot. You mean run hot? If the power transformer is getting physically too hot to touch, then you've got some other issue in the amp where something's drawing too much current or it's a failed transformer. Given the relatively low cost of a suitable power transformer for that amp, I don't know that I'd modify the circuit. I would just change out the power transformer if that's really the issue. But you want to make sure you don't have any partial short somewhere drawing too much current. There's might be something else causing that. You might be trying to fix a symptom rather than fixing the root cause. But without your amp in front of me, I can't say much more. Sorry. I'm trying to remember. I think I've had a Black Pearl, a Ginsbens. I've had a Ginsbens, and there's another amp company that has a model called a Pearl that I've had, but I can't remember what that one was. Ginsbens, the one I had in was a bass amp, I believe, and it was okay. But it's been so long, I don't have anything other than vague recollections that it was okay. For some reason, when I play a B minor, Vox amps don't like that chord very much, says Bottom Kitchen. Well, I've got to say, I've played an awful lot of chords through an awful lot of Voxes and an awful lot of Fenders, and I have not found that to be the case. And I can't think of why you might be having that, unless you're playing a very old Vox, which has got some ghosting. In the United States, the hum in a Vox and the frequency that ghosts is right between a B and a B flat. So you might be running into intermodulation distortion, but it's something that would not be happening in a healthy Vox. Let me show you guys something. Unless I just hear an obvious awfulness coming from an amp, one of the ways that I quickly decide whether I need to look into the filter caps of an amp or any other thing causing ghosting is I will put on a neck pickup and I'll play the low E open and I'll play the high E at the 3rd fret and I'll listen for beating and tension, and then I'll play at the 4th fret. So I'm playing it's E minor, E major. It's actually playing the minor and major 10th. But for some reason, on most guitars, that will quickly tell you if there's something right, if you have ripple or any other issue making things go sour. So this 66 Super Reverb passes the test. Make sure the guitar's in tune first. And I don't know why it is that the minor and major 10th shows that so much more than doing just one octave apart or doing a third. If I do it with the minor and major 3rd, it's not as apparent. And that includes, a 2-octave choice there. But that reveals an awful lot. And I will take an amp will come in and they have like a whole laundry list of things that the owner thinks are wrong with it. And I'll do that and I'll hear that and I'll say, yeah, it's got ripple, filter cap, or something's up with that. And then I'll look through the laundry list. I'm like, yeah, that are all caused by what I just heard. A scope will also show it, but I spend a lot more time coming up playing intervals than I did using a scope. I still use my ears more than the scope. Our Life in Wyoming says, I just made a reissue Princeton Reverb sound like a very expensive amp thanks to what he's learned from the channel. Hey, I'm glad to be of help. If I get hit by a bus, some of my knowledge stays in the world. And if you ever want to know more about the 100 Years' War, maybe I'll do a secondary channel just for that. Nikki's always making fun of me because my interests are usually so obscure. This is one of the things in life that I'm interested in that's relatively obscure that fortunately I have an audience for and other people seem to like. So. Outside of headroom, does impedance affect tone, PBJ says. I'm thinking specifically of 5F1, my Victoria's 8 ohm, my Fender Tweeds for 4 ohm. No. You're not going to. There are people who are saying, oh, you're using more of the windings if you use this tap versus that tap. No, it's nonsense. Maybe in a very, very cheap, poorly built transformer you'd hear a difference, but no. It's not how the physics behind it works. Victoria versus Fender Tweeds, it's not going to matter. Or rather, there are so many other things that can make a difference that you might say, well, the only thing I see different is this versus that. And so you say, oh, well, the 8 ohm sounds like this, the 4 ohm sounds like that. But that's not why you're hearing it. You may be hearing a real difference, but it's for something else that you can't visually confirm, but that's visually a difference. It's like all the people out there saying, maple neck strats are brighter than rosewood neck strats. Well, when people are just looking at the fretboard change, they're not saying, okay, well, most rosewood strats use alder bodies. Most maple neck strats have ash bodies. They're not saying, well, they changed the way the pickups were wound in this period, or if you're doing Telecasters, most maple neck Telecasters have brass saddles. Most rosewood neck Teles have steel saddles. All these little things, particularly the body would change. And so all these things have changed behind the sunburst, behind the paint job that people don't think about, and the pickups are wound different, but they can see that eighth inch of wood on top is different, sometimes less than an eighth of an inch as the 60s progressed, and they ascribe all the difference to that. Now there is a definite difference in feel to the player between maple and rosewood because of the lacquer versus not. And there's probably some degree of difference in sound between a neck which has got maple versus rosewood fretboard. But I have played so many ash body guitars with both kinds of necks. And this one sounds brighter and it's got rosewood. This one sounds darker and it's got maple. I think that if you were to do a big sample where the only variable was the rosewood versus maple fingerboard, I think you'd have a lot of things which people would be surprised by. I think you'd find an awful lot of bright-sounding rosewood boards, an awful lot of dark or warm-sounding maple boards. But you combine that cosmetic difference with ash versus alder, and the various fuller plast coatings and all the two different polyesters that they use versus the lacquer that they used, things that people don't think about. Aloha, Victor. I know this is late, but Hi-Fi Blast Duman. I'm sorry to just publicly argue with you about transformer taps, but what you're doing won't hurt anything. But you're chasing a ghost. I'm not saying that because I have to be the authority on things. It's just I've chased so many of these damn ghosts, and I know which ones end up being anyway. He slimed me. I feel so funky. There are a lot of goose chases in this stuff, and I've gone down a lot of those rabbit holes. And at the end of the day, some of this stuff is just finding differences so you have a difference to talk about. Yeah, Federico, a well-designed cathode bias single-ended amp can handle 6V6 and 6L6. You may not have either particular individual tube optimally biased. You might have an amp where the 6L6 sounds better because it's biased in a better part of its range than the 6V6. Cathode bias promises a lot more than it delivers when it comes to changing tube types. But, I had a THT univalve that was about as good an execution of that concept as it's possible to do, but people in the forums ascribe magic abilities to that little amp that just weren't there. All right, Bojan is asking the question of all questions: what has more influence on the amplifier's tone, the loudspeaker or the circuitry design and the components that shape this signal? The answer is both. You can't have the world's best speaker and a bad amp. and get a good result, or have a really great amp into a bad sounding speaker and get a great sound. It all has to work together towards a common goal. I will say that aside from things which affect noise and longevity, or fundamental big changes in sound, a lot of the amps out there that are getting the Fromel mods will be better off just getting a new speaker. Say you've got a deluxe reverb reissue, and all the forums are telling you get the Bill M kit or the Fromel kit and make all these, put all these orange drops in there, and you end up with hot glue everywhere. Whereas someone more experienced, Brad, myself, Dave Friedman, would say, yeah, well, let's try this. Let's just lift the bright cap out of the circuit, and let's take the C12K out and put a vintage 30 in, and let's set the bias and make sure all the hardware is tight. What do you think now? That makes a big difference. But I cannot take a Crate Blue Voodoo and magically make it sound phenomenal with better speakers and cab. But you can take a good sounding amp and make it sound not so great with bad speakers. Anyway, but ultimately you have to be thinking about both things at the same time and in conjunction. Hey, Nick Romy. I have no thoughts on the quality of Eggcore because I've not tried any Eggcore. They have, I've not looked into them in a long time, but back pre-COVID, when Classic Tone was around and Habor was much less expensive and Hammond had fewer issues, and Patrick was with us at Mercury, though the new guy at Mercury is very nice to deal with as well. I still miss Patrick. Eggcores were just so cheap that I didn't ever take a gamble on them because the amps were never for me; they're for clients, and I wanted something that I knew was going to be good, and price was never really the consideration. So I've not tried Eggcores, and maybe they're fantastic, but I just don't know. Hey, Christopher Quine. He's got a lot of trouble with the 68 reissue Vibro Champ. Always weird static stuff, intermittent tubes all swap, guitars change out for different ones, cables, location. Man, I'm sorry. That can be a real problem. I cannot give you a magic bullet from a long distance. I'm not the people misunderstood my videos on that amp. I thought it was built pretty well for its price point. I thought the digital reverb was not great, and the stock speaker was not great, but the actual construction seemed okay. If I had your amp in right now, and I knew that you'd swap tubes and all that other stuff, the first thing I would do was I would make sure that all the hardware is tight and that PCB is held to the chassis by screws, many of which are making grounds. I would make sure that all those screws are tight. I've had a lot of amps in with circuit boards where the circuit board ground is made via a screw to a standoff as opposed to a wired ground connection. And just tightening a screw or backing off on that screw and then cleaning it and then retightening it magically makes things like you're describing go away. I'm not saying that's what yours needs, but it's the first thing I would check if I had your amp here. And then I, because I do this and I take safety precautions, I would have the amp on and I would start going through the entire amp, pressing on, putting pressure on the board, moving wires, tapping on things with a non-conductive probe, basically a plastic chopstick. You can also use wood, and see if I could isolate a cause. Those two things together would be the first thing I would do. So good luck with it, but they're not inherently a bad amplifier, the 68 Custom Vibro Champ. Unlike the Gibson Falcon, which does seem like shit. This doesn't seem like... Here's the thing about the Falcon from what I've seen on Brad's video. It doesn't look like shit. It looks like a $500 amp. And when you take the back panel off, you can see at the same time a whole bunch of quick connects and Molex headers and all this stuff right above where it says hand-wired and Petaluma. It's not hand-wired. parts of it are, because they don't have a machine that does that one task yet. But it's a bunch of marketing, and for the price, it's just ridiculous. It should be a $700 to $1,200 amp. It's not. Hey, Otto, I've not had a chance to try a Little Sister yet. I hope to at some point. Jimmy Mac, I don't want to go too far into this, but I tried that, and I didn't care for it compared to the Lamar. I thought the taper was not what I wanted. I don't know if John's doing exactly what Friedman's doing, and I don't want to get too far into this because I don't know if any of that's proprietary information that they don't want on the internet. But I did not like the behavior of it. It wasn't the taper that I was looking for. I don't know what John's doing. So, in the Lamar that I do in a fixed bias amp, I'm not doing it to ground. I'm doing it to bias, and I believe Dave is as well. I'm not sure what you mean grounding the pot. So, Benson's great. Tyler Hall. Benson's are great. I think they're a little bit limited in the sound, but they're really well built. Yeah, we're doing a 5E3 giveaway very soon. We're doing it for charity, and it's going to be you buy chances to win, and I've got to watch that. I can't call it certain words. I have to call it other things. Otherwise, it becomes gambling, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's not gambling. It's very much not gambling. I just got to find the right words for it. But a very good local charity, Children's Cancer, is going to be getting every dime, and they're going to be actually getting all the if you buy a ticket, it goes to them. I'll never have access to any of that. So 100% of the profits, and it's being sponsored by Mojo Tone and Tube Depot and me. And second prize, I'll go ahead and say this for you guys this far into the stream. We'll do this in official announcement. Second place prize. If you don't win the amp, you'll be able to choose the set of pickups of your choice from Murray Pickups, Murray Guitar Pickups in Australia. So if you have a Les Paul, you can choose a set of humbuckers. You got a Strat, you can get 3 single coils. You got a Tele, et cetera, et cetera. So the pickups of your choice that from his options will be the second place prize. So I think it's going to be a nice thing for everyone, and we'll get started on that soon. And we're here right on time. Chris Marsteller. Yeah, I'm really I'm really pleased with the Murrays. I think they sound really good. I also like the Lawlers an awful lot. But I'm not going to take these Murrays out. I think they sound great. One of the things that some people aren't aware of, other people dismiss the whole thing because of this issue, is that on this Super Reverb, if the Murray sounds a little bit not as bright as the Lawler, well, I had the amp set 6, 5.5, 5.5, so pretty neutral. If I turn the treble up to like 6.5 or 7, then the Murray's got that high-end snap. And so I could adjust the amp settings to make it a little more optimal for either the Lawlers or the Murrays. And at that point, I don't even know if it's the Murrays versus the Lawlers versus the two different guitars, because tone width does matter, people. I will say that despite all that, each pickup had its own characteristics, and that's why I did the amp flat, so you could hear the differences. No amp tweaking can make the Mojo Tones magically great, or could add, they just don't have any dynamic range, or could magically take away, give more mids to the Yosemites, which are very thin and bright. Not a bad sound. It's a very characteristic thing for a certain style of Telecaster. But if someone would say you have to use Murrays or Lawlers, choose, I'm like, hey, what a terrible problem to have. They're both great. But like I said earlier in the thing, I like to support small businesses, and while Lawler is a lot smaller of a business than Seymour Duncan, Ben Murray is a lot smaller at this point than Lawler. And 15, 20 years ago, if I'd said, hey, I got these pickups by this guy named Jason Lawler, you'd be like, okay, I never heard of him. That's how it all starts. And, to a degree, that's not rocket science. A tele pickup is a fairly basic thing. And that's interesting to me that if you get a Seymour Duncan, it typically sounds pretty damn good. But you get a Lawler, you get a Fralin, you get a Murray, it sounds that much better. They have more dynamics. They have a different harmonic content. It's just some X factor. I think it's just taking the time to get all the details right instead of saying, this is what goes into production and this is what each one does on the machine and go. And I like that it's one of those things where even a basic thing can have individuality still. There's also the magnet choices and how the wires are done. I didn't mention this in review, but Murray's A5 neck, A3 bridge, like the 51, 52 teles were. It's a very good execution of a basic idea. And there are other people doing it, but there are many guns like it, but this one is mine. Hey, Mad Max. I love my SG. I play it an awful lot. It's going to be coming back up in the featured videos soon. I've just been in a tele mode lately, and I've just got a casino, which I put 11s on to be my couch guitar. I was talking earlier about how I have to work out my pinky. I'm doing all the workouts at night, an hour or two, as much as possible. On those 11s, and then when I go to the 9s and 10s on the other guitars, it's like, oh, that's really easy. But yeah, I love the SG. Ooh, he's just got an old Plexi 1959, works sound amazing, it sounds clean, but the transformer holder is slightly bent. Should I be worried? As in bent so that it's not flush to the chassis? Or I would look at it as just a mechanical strength issue. If it's not flush to the chassis for whatever reason, see if you can make it be flush again. That might require removing it and taking it to a machine shop that could do the proper press. The transformer holder is, assuming you mean that power transformer where it has that frame. If you mean just like a output transformer flange at the base, I will take those the hardware out and I will lift them up and I will clamp them with the C-clamp and 2 pieces of steel until it goes back to flat. You want it to be mechanically strong and flush to the chassis and not capable of moving at all. If it's cosmetically a little bit off after that, doesn't matter. But without seeing photos of it, I can't speculate more. Hey, Jake Schneider. I'm glad I might have helped you with the Hiwatt. DB, I'm not in Georgia, but I have been, but I am in Memphis. Hey, Mickey in the Netherlands. Is it better to mod a 77 or 78 in your Mint Silverface Deluxe Reverb to Blackface specs and add a master volume, or build a Blackface Deluxe Reverb kit, add master volume, and sell as Silverface? I don't know what the prices are like in Europe for these things, number one. I don't know the physical condition of your 77, 78. You say it's in your Mint, that helps. The 77, 78 is going to have a dadoed and glued-in baffle rather than a screwed-in baffle. So if anything goes wrong with the baffle, which is essentially a chipboard, it becomes expensive to repair. A lot of that period of fenders, the grill cloth is actually on a separate frame, which is Velcroed to the baffle. I'm not sure if they did that on that era of Deluxe Reverb. Those can warp, and sometimes you say it's Mint, so it's probably not going to have a whole bunch of discoloration. So those are just cosmetic things, which you can bypass entirely. Well, the baffle is not cosmetic. The baffle can be important, but if yours is in good shape, it's a non-issue. The main difference between the 77 and the 67 is the amount of wax on the board. And that wax often does become very conductive, as I've shown on my channel. I think the transformers that you have in that 77 are better quality. Those old Schumachers are better quality than almost anything you can buy today. So it's going to depend on the quality of the Blackface Reverb kit you buy. I would think take your 77, 78, and add a master volume on the rear panel, as I showed in that video called Adding a Master Volume to a Vintage Fender. So you can do it without drilling any holes. And I think you'd end up with a good thing that did not devalue your 77, 78. And there's some other issues with, you don't need to change it all the way to AB763 specs because the Deluxe Reverb didn't change that much. You don't even need to change the 47K resistors or the 330K resistors in the phase inverter if you decrease the 10 nanofarad input coupling cap to 3.3 nanofarad. All of a sudden, that will behave frequency-wise like the previous phase inverter. But beyond that, I can't tell you what to do, and I don't know what the value of a 77, 78 Deluxe Reverb in the Netherlands is versus what the kit would cost and what's in the kit. I'd rather have a good condition 77, 78 than most kit builds that I've seen. Jojo, top 5 speakers for Deluxe Reverb. He's got a 68. Top of my head, the 5 that I most commonly recommend to people. The Warehouse ET65, this is not in particular order. The Warehouse G12C, the Eminence Alessandro, is it SC something? It's the Alessandro Eminence. The Vintage 30 or the Warehouse Veteran 30. And if you are not diming the amp but playing clean and semi-clean, the Celestion Alnico Blue, which is 15 watts but will hold up typically in a Deluxe Reverb if you're not pushing it above 5 on the volume very often. Those probably be the top 5 choices for most players for a Deluxe Reverb. I prefer the sound of the Veteran 30 from Warehouse to the Vintage 30. Clean, they're almost interchangeable. In fact, the Vintage 30 might have a slight edge when clean, but there's a 2K notch kind of spike when overdriven with the Vintage 30 that to me gets kind of a honking Dokken kind of thing that I'm not a big fan of. And the Veteran 30 doesn't have that spike around 2K. Some people love that spike. Some people have built their entire guitar sound around that spike. I don't much care for it. I don't have any recommendations on Blues Driver style pedals because I don't. I just don't keep up with the pedal market. I would have to go play a whole bunch before I had an opinion on them, and I just don't like playing pedals that much. Hey, E. Einfalt. Sorry for save for Brightcap. Are the reliability mods for a Twin Reverb reissue the same as Deluxe Reverb reissue? Overall, the stuff where the heaters and the screens are, there's a trace that I cut and I replaced with a shielded wire on the Deluxe Reverb. It's not necessary in the Twin. There's a different trace on the Twin, but I can't get into it right now. But overall, the same basic mods. Let's see. This is the third question about the Tony Brunos. Yeah, kind of uninspiring. You say, yeah. Like I said earlier, they're meh. Just sell it and get something else. It's not worth that. That one you can polish it all you want, but you'll still see the bits of corn. Possibly the grossest thing ever said on the channel so far. I'm just getting warmed up. Let's see. Is it okay to plug a 4-ohm champ into 8-ohm speaker? Fred asks. It depends on the champ and who made the transformer. So I don't know if you're talking about a Fender, which is going to have a triad. In general, I would be cautious with a champ because those are tiny little output transformers. In general, as a very sweeping statement, most Fenders, particularly from the 60s and 70s with the Schumacher transformers, and even the 50s with the larger triad output transformers, it would be safe to mismatch one step in either direction. You could run a 4-ohm cab and an 8-ohm speaker or vice versa. When it comes to a Champ and how tiny those, and some of the Tweed, for instance, with that tiny little output transformer, I'd be cautious of that. If you have an 8-ohm speaker and you have a 4-ohm Champ, you could maybe get a 8-ohm dummy load and put it in parallel with the speaker, but you're going to lose half the power through the speaker. It'd be best just to match the impedance there. Hey, Michael. Yeah, if you have the time and you can, yeah, adding that shielding tape, as long as it's continuous to itself on the panel and it makes contact with the metal chassis, can really be nice as far as keeping various noises out of your old Tweed Fender style amp, because the electrical environment today is much noisier than it was when those amps were designed. And yeah, especially if you have an actual 50s, which has the old white asbestos panel, in which case it's nice to cover that with some shielding, just so that you have a smaller chance of getting loose asbestos into the air. Though it's unlikely to kill you, it's just nice not to have a ticking time bomb there, just in case someone were to tear it by mistake. Tube damper rings are viable in that they exist, and sometimes that might be of slight benefit. But I don't think that they offer much benefit. I find that a lot of times they get baked on to tubes and just make the glass yucky, and they don't do a whole hell of a lot. But if in rare cases on a preamp tube, it can make a slight difference. Power tubes, I find it makes almost no difference. But if you like them, you're not hurting anything. You're just going to end up with little burnt bits of plastic on your tube glass eventually. Hey, Michael Padilla, I appreciate that. He's got a 71 Marshall 50 watt that's too loud for his needs. That can happen. Any thoughts on sticking 6v6s in there? I know I need to set the impedance to have the cab impedance. I don't think that that's a good idea. You're still not going to have the right impedance load with 6v6s. And 6v6s are not going to be happy at the voltages present in 50 watt from 1971. It's going to have relatively high B+. I think you might just need to either get a master volume installed or look into various attenuator products, and see Jeff McElwain's last live stream for information about the difference between various attenuators. He covered that pretty well. 50 watt Marshalls are loud, and 6v6s don't like high plate voltage, and so you got a high plate voltage 50 watt Marshall. I don't think the changing the tubes is the right way to do it. Wannabe guitarists, I don't know anyone doing similar Vox mods in Europe. But would be if you are within shipping distance of Denmark, find Klaus Holm Jensen or Jensen. I don't remember where in Denmark he is. Klaus Holm Jensen, and if he is close to you, I would be glad to tell Klaus what I do. Not because he needs the instructions, but because when I came up with my mods, there was a certain amount of experimenting, which took a certain amount of time. And if I were to send them to him, he'd say, "Oh yeah, that totally makes sense." And then that's 3 hours of experimenting and calculations he wouldn't have to make on your dime. So there are certain techs I'll give my information out to, is because it's not giving them tone secrets. It's just giving a shortcut to make it clients. I'll give Brad this information. I share this kind of information with Chris Church at Church Audio, just outside of Toronto, for Canadian people. Canadian people, they're so weird. But I don't know if Denmark is close enough to you. Wannabe guitarist. So now we're here Pair character exaggerating, stretching his arm forward to offer a cup of coffee. I assume that was a super sticker, and I don't see the super stickers on the window that I have here. I just get a description of them. So pair character exaggeratingly stretching his arm forward to offer a cup of coffee. Thank you, Curtis. Appreciate that. So I think now that I have caught up with the chat from the previous intermission, it is time to take another intermission. So we will get back in 7 minutes, y'all. All right, I'm ending the intermission a little bit early because we have so many questions for me to try to get to. Real fast, I just want to point out, if you've listened to the video I put up today, twice today and once last night, but the final version is up. One of the headlines buried in that is that when I first did the tele video last week with the four tellies into the 66 Super Reverb, I was concerned that the speaker that I mic'd might be problematic and the need to get those reconed. But I also knew that the amp had a mismatch of old preamp tubes, so it's got all new preamp tubes and a new rectifier tube, and it's been rebiased, and all that glitchy stuff went away. I've got to get back into it one more time. There's a little bit of a noise if I wiggle the phase inverter tube. I just need to clean that socket again, most likely. But the speakers are seemingly very healthy. So that's really nice to find out. Let's see. Ooh, how do I manage parts inventory? It's a matter of keeping the often utilized on hand and then buying rare. Yeah, pretty much that. I used to have a wider... I used to stock more stuff. I mean, I have thousands of things here. If I were to turn the camera, I'll clean this place up because I've got stuff just to the side that you don't see that's in progress. It's a little bit messy. I'll clean this place up again. I do it about 3 times a year and do a tour of the space. But I have thousands of things. Nikki said he does. The things I use the most, I actually have labeled, like if I need to do resistors from Marshalls or Fenders or Voxes, I've got all of them individually labeled, all the caps I most commonly used, all that. So the stuff that I use all the time, I try to keep in stock. It was hard to do during COVID because so many things were out of stock. And one of the issues I have right now is that my stash of carbon comps has been depleting. And the company, Walson, that I loved, their current production CCs seemingly has stopped making them because they are obsolete parts, and so I'm pretty much left with either sourcing out new old stock or going to Zycons, and Zycons are not as pretty. They just don't look very nice in an old Fender. I only use carbon comps when restoring an old amp. Maybe Walson will start making them again just because Mausers, things go in and out, but I used to have a lot of stuff, and then COVID, I would get things as they became available, and I have been restocking. I just got in 5 3-conductor power cables. I'll probably go through those this month, and I'll have to order some more. But when it's something relatively obscure or a value of resistor that I just don't use very often, then I have to order it. Like if I get the okay to calibrate that Moog synth, I either need to order a 10K resistor, a 20K resistor, or put 2 10Ks in series because I don't stock 20K resistors because all the amps use 22K resistors. I also have just boxes full of stuff that I will organize someday, but I'll dig through them. I kind of know where stuff is. It's either in this one or this one, and I just got to dig through and find it. Thanks, Elias. I appreciate that. Red Knob Twins are very noisy. They're very finicky to get working. They have a lot of things that go wrong, a lot of fragile solder joints that break on the weirdly done pots, and the solder joints on the weirdly done input jacks. So the jacks and the pots often need resoldering, and they've got a low voltage supply, which can be very noisy, and the effects loop integration is noisy. It depends on what you want the sound of. If you use the overdrive channel and you love it, Lord help you, you can restore it. But if you just want the clean twin sound, I think that it has so many things trying to interfere with that you might be better off selling it and getting just a standard 65 reissue twin reverb or a 70s model. You can even find some of the 60s ones that are relatively affordable these days just because they're not fashionable. But I am hesitant to have anyone throw any more money into a Red Knob Fender. Groove tubes are just rebranded other tubes. Typically, they're Softex and JJs that have been relabeled as groove tubes and sold at a higher price. There's nothing specifically wrong with them, but you can also just get the Softex and JJs that say Softex and JJ and save some money, and might have some better choices from various vendors. Let's see. Hi-Fi, I would not do a Dumble mod on a red knob twin. Then you're going to have a noisy Dumble instead of a noisy twin. Yeah, I'm bottom kitchen. I'm not convinced that the new hand-wired Voxes are going to be anything better than they've already done. I'd love to be wrong, but it just seems insulting for them to say we've carefully researched things, and this time we've gotten it right, because they've said that before, and each time they get something else wrong, and it's, the AC15 and the AC10 are just 10 and 15 watt versions of the AC30. They're not doing the actual JMI circuits. And all the JMI stuff has been known for 60 years. There's no careful research. Ask me. Ask Stephen Grosvenor. Ask Don Butler. You don't need to carefully research it. Just ask the guys out here in the trenches who've been dealing with the real deal. We'll tell you how to build it. Let's see. They've not reached out to me. I don't think they've reached out to Stefan. I don't know if they've reached out to Don. They probably hired a kid out of college to reinvent a wheel. Let's see how they do. Nothing wrong with kids out of college. It's just I've noticed that if you graduate with a degree in electronics or electrical engineering these days, the really clever kids are ending up at Google and Cisco, and the ones who end up redesigning 60-year-old app designs, maybe that's too mean. I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, Leland, the Tube Effects had servo motors, and the Fender Cyber Twin had servo motors. You know what fails in those amps? Deoxit D5 can be bad for pots. F5 is a better choice for potentiometers. Vader Lube. I can't, Hi-Fi Blast, Dumont, I can't tell you how much it would cost to recone speakers and recap a Farsifa, because I've never had a Farsifa TR70. I can't tell you what it would cost. Sorry. I don't know if that's an amp that would sound good after it's done, so I don't know. Hey, Seth B. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, you can use two speakers with this Princeton Reverb. The external jack is an auxiliary jack, and you got 8 ohm speaker internally, and you've got what external speaker, which we probably want it to be 8 ohms as well. Technically, you'd have a 4 ohm load on the 8 ohm secondary, but as I said earlier, the old Schumacher can handle that. So you can use the external jack either as an additional and in addition to the internal, or you can unplug the internal and just run into a larger external 8 ohm cab. Brian D says, in the Deluxe Reverb issue, why do I remove C31, the 220 microfarad power cap, versus replacing with the new 220 microfarad? Well, the 220 microfarad in series with the 47 microfarad gives you something in the neighborhood of 35-ish microfarad, whatever. I don't have the math in my head right now, which is close to the original 32 microfarad. And because they have two in series, and they have two different resistors of different values, that gives a series connection which is about 35 microfarad and is capable of handling 600 volts. which can be fine if you have a really high B plus of, if someone were to take out the tube rectifier, put in a solid state plug-in rectifier. The trouble is, if the resistor fails, if either resistor fails, then you can have, or the bottom cap, which in the stock amp is an IC brand, fails, which is likely. Then all of a sudden, the only cap you've got is a 100 volt, 220 microfarad. So the IC caps are not good. And I just don't find it necessary. And it's one more thing that can go wrong. And in normal operation with a 500 volt, 47 or 32 microfarad cap there, and a tube rectifier, which a Deluxe Reverb should use, you're never going to have more B plus than 500 volts. It's not even going to approach it. You're going to be closer to 420 on a good day. So there's no need to do a series cap for higher voltage. There's no need to do a series cap to get to the desired filtering. You can use a 30 or 32 microfarad if you want the sound of the old ones, which is 216s in parallel. Or you can use a 47, have a little less ripple. It's not going to negatively affect the sound of the amp. So I do it for simplicity. It's just one less thing to go wrong. And so you're taking out one resistor and jumpering one resistor and taking out one capacitor. That's two things that could have gone wrong that won't. But if you want to put in a new Vishay 220 microfarad, that's great. Just replace both the I think it's 100K and 470K. I don't remember off the top of my head. The resistors in parallel with those caps, replace with some 2-watt resistors rather than the little half watts that they have in there. Let's see. Hey, Paulo, thanks for joining us from Brazil. Most things in amps are pretty simple. You've got, it's like Taco Bell. Which different combination of the same 7 ingredients do you want today? And do you want it in 2 tortillas that we've grilled or just 1 tortilla at a time? It sounds like I'm insulting everyone who makes tube amps. I'm not. There are a few basic recipes that always work, and you combine the same ingredients in slightly different ways, but I've not seen anything that's too off the beaten track. There's a couple amps out there that do things like Cascode gain stages, but it's rare. People tried a lot of things in the 60s and 70s, active EQs and parametric EQs and very elaborate Van Daxel implementations. But guitarists would say, that's great. I want it to sound like my Fender. Or that's great. Doesn't sound like a Marshall. Don't want it. It's a real interesting thing. And I don't know if it's purely musical or if it's also psychological. Bass players traditionally are always looking for a new, expansive range of controls. From alembic basses to alembic preamps, which are just normal channel of a twin, to all kinds of crazy designs and EQs and boosts and stuff. Whereas guitarists always want, 2 or 3 knobs and a switch, and either the Fender sound or the Vox sound or the Marshall sound, and those aren't that different from each other in some fundamental ways. So the guitar industry has not rewarded innovation, is one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is a really good example of that fairly basic idea. It just sounds so good that we haven't needed anything else. And when the next change comes, if it's going to be things like Tim Henson or some other kid whose name we don't know yet, it's going to do something that doesn't sound anything like Zeppelin or the Beatles or Pink Floyd or Hendrix, but it's going to have the same impact. That kid is in the future, whatever her name is at this point, if she's even been born yet, someone's going to be the next big shift, the way that Eddie was, the way that Hendrix was, the way that the Beatles were, the way that Elvis was. And the music that they make might be awesome and have nothing at all to do with all this stuff. It could be something that can only be accomplished digitally. And that's something I think about why is it that all the digital guys are just emulating tube amps? Because, I mean, I see why it's important to also be able to do that. But surely there's got to be things you can do with digital that can only be done with digital, while giving the player control over enough parameters to be able to shape it to their own musical needs. So that's where the innovation ought to be coming next, and I have not seen it yet. I'm not talking about the effects. You can do all kinds of things with effects, but in terms of generating a signal, the core part of it. So we'll see. We'll see if I live long enough. We'll see how it goes. Christopher, I'm skipping your opinion, asking about opinions on the tele pickup shootout. I'm hopeful that people here have replied to you and given you their opinions. Here's a question from Jared G. Where do I source high quality components from? Resistors, caps, pots, etc. The majority of the things I order come from Mouser, CE Distribution, and Tube Depot. I also get things from DigiKey as necessary. I also get things from Hoffman as necessary. I get things from Valve Storm on occasion, and AmpRepairParts.com has some stuff that I use from time to time. But the majority of the stuff I do are from either Mouser, CE Distribution, which is you have to be a business, have a business license to order, have an account with them. But you can buy from them if you go to tubesandmore.com or antiqueelectronics.com. Those are all the consumer versions of CE Distribution, or Tube Depot. And for certain things, I go to Mojo Tone. I've got a couple other secondary and tertiary suppliers, but Mouser, CE, and Tube Depot are the ones that are keeping FedEx employed as far as my address. Yeah, I saw that Paul got his bass back, and it's been sitting in an attic for 50 years. I'm glad that he has the money to get it restored, and it'd be interesting to see if it can be. But that's not the magic bass. He's had the magic bass this whole time. Let's see. Yeah, the high treble channel on a Marshall 1959 is always noisier than the normal channel. That's what happens when you have a 5 nanofarad bright cap. The thing about that amp is it's going to be noisy, but the noise is going to be so far behind the pain-splitting level of what you're playing. And in the context of a band with other guitars and keyboards and cymbals going, no one noticed that Hendrix was noisy. No one noticed that Led Zeppelin was noisy. People certainly noticed that Deep Purple was noisy, but, he also had treble boosters. I am not familiar with the 79 Legend Rock and Roll 50. Sorry, ET Music. I thought Eliminator was mostly Rockman, but I could be wrong. Hey, Wes. Let's see. So people talking to each other while I was on a break, which is good. I love that you guys talk to each other as well. Sometimes I feel like you guys are having a party here, a conversation that I'm always late to it. Michael Chorkos. What's my opinion on Roland Jazz Chorus amps? I think they were fantastic in 1978, 1979 when they were changing the world. In 2024, they are relatively large, heavy, noisy, low headroom amps with one good sound, and you don't even have real control over the chorus parameters. I don't understand why people continue to buy them. You can get all those sounds out of so many solid state and modeling amps these days. You know, if you get a Katana 100, you can get that sound, but then you can get a whole bunch of other sounds, and it costs less and it weighs less. And the speakers in jazz choruses are crap, and the distortion's useless. They have no clean headroom. You get to a certain point and you hit a wall, and they're expensive to service for what they are. I'm just not a big fan, and I know people love them, and I just don't get it. Let's see. Going to catch up. Yeah, Chris R. got an email from Amplified Parts about some double mica JJ6V6s that are supposed to reduce vibrations in combo amps. Yeah, Brad was mentioning that earlier. I've not tried them yet, and I hope that they do, because that's the big problem that JJs have had for me, is that in combos they become microphonic. If they fix that, I'm all about it. Tell you what, next combo that comes in, I'll get some. Next 6v6 combo that comes in that needs some tubes, I'll try some, and we'll find out. I hope that they do, because I remember back in the day they were not as subject to becoming microphonic, and all of a sudden they just like flipped on the microphonic switch, and it just bad. No news on the American Western Electric plant. I don't know if that's ever going to be finished, and if it is, if any of us can ever afford it. In the AC15 circuit, what's my opinion on the 47 nanofarad versus 10 nanofarad phase inverter output caps? 10 nanofarad makes more sense as far as phase alignment. 10 nanofarad makes more sense in any of those amps, but 47 nanofarad is better than 150 nanofarad, which the AC30 had. But particularly in the various Voxes which have a cathode bias trim added, which is the current ones. You want as small an output coupling cap as possible. 10 nanofarad is quite good. If you have too large an output coupling cap, you're just going to be getting some noise from the bias circuit. I don't have any experience with cruise amps, Dominic. Sorry. People talking about the various pickups that they like, and I'm glad to hear that. Gooden says he lives high up on a ridge. Well, I'm here in Memphis, and you know what? If you go half a mile from the Mississippi Bridge, there is no high up on a ridge location. I don't know what Chuck Berry was smoking when he wrote that lyric. Hey, Reckless Toboggan. See the video I put up today where I talk about that very subject when wiring a guitar? In general, I'm running about 700 degrees. Sometimes I'll go down to 650 Fahrenheit. If I'm doing some lead-free stuff and I want to work really fast, I'll go up to about 750. If I'm dealing with some big eyelets with a whole bunch of stuff there and I need to get a whole bunch of solder out and heat it up fast, I'll go up to 800. Sometimes if I am doing if I need to add solder to a chassis joint, not a big one, but say like one wire on the brass strip on a fender, I'll turn it up to 900, and I can just do that. That way I don't have to heat up the big iron. But if I'm going to do more than one joint like that, I'll heat up the big iron, which is my 80-watt Weller. I will eventually make the amp buying guide for over $1,000. Probably $2,000 will be the criteria. It's just been hard to find the time, and the market keeps changing as the prices ping-pong all over the place. Tungsol tubes for life, Hi-Fi says. No, I've had issues with Tungsols too. And Tungsols and Mullers are made in the same factory. Tungsols can be great. They can also have channel, they can have leakage, signal leakage through the cathode for two channels in a fender. But Tungsols and Mullards are kind of interchangeable as to their issues. JJ's very rarely microphonic for me. Maybe it's the vendor you're getting them from. I don't find that JJs are dark. They're just not. They're a little less present in some circuits, not in others. I think you might be running into some batch issues, or I don't know where you're getting your tubes from. Let's see. Endo says, hi, Lyle. Hi, Endo. You said to look at a Cerebella amp because of its headroom weight. I like it, but it's too expensive for me. Any cheaper suggestions? What's your thought on a Fender ProSonic and a 93 Concert? Well, I understand the expense. Avoid the ProSonic. Avoid the 93 Concert. Those are dead ends. I think you can still get a used deluxe reverb reissue for about $800 to $1,200 these days. That's always a good contender, and you can have reliability upgrades done to it down the road. You can try different speakers down the road. You can spread out your cost. Remember that Cerebella costs about $200 more than a new Fender Deluxe Reverb reissue. So it's not that the Cer is overpriced; it's that everything is going up in cost. But I don't remember all the criteria that you're asking about last time we spoke on this. So I don't know what else is out there, but I think the Cerebella is an excellent execution of that classic American sound. If you want to have a similar thing for less money, the Princeton and Deluxe Reverb 65 reissues have always been a good option. And if you're okay with buying used, that gets you into a much lower price point. Let's see. Clint Bailey says, I'm evaluating a Dr. Z Maz 18 Mark II 21 production, and I like it. However, you're giving me pause. Well, most of the issues in the Maz 18 reverb are specifically to the reverb model, and that most of them they fixed with the Mark II. It's the Mark I's that I had the problems with. The only remaining caveat I have about the Dr. Z's is that if you get one of the ones with reverb, get the combo, not the head, because in the combo, the reverb tank is physically too close to the transformers and they buzz. So you get the combo and the reverb tank is way separate from the transformers. You don't have all that buzz and hum, and they're good amps. You just make sure the jacks are tight. I have no problem with Dr. Z's overall. I found that their Maz Mark I, which they called it after Mark II came out, the way the reverb and master were done was very noisy and strange, the way the master affected the reverb. And any of the heads should not have reverb. But beyond that, I've never gone after Dr. Z's. I also think that, honestly, the way they're built with the leads wrapped multiple times around the turret, when service is eventually necessary, it costs more because it takes longer to undo and redo that properly. But that's not a slam on them. It's just something to be aware of. Hey, John, appreciate that very much. Thank you. All right, so he's talking about the 64 custom hand-wired deluxe reverb. He bought one last year. It's an X-Demo, so cheaper. That's good. Seems quiet. That's good. Love the sound. Design change fits custom naming, and I can channel jump. Still issues I should get fixed. If you're happy with it, that's great. It's going to be noisier than it otherwise would be because the way they did the reverb and trim on both channels. And because of the way they laid it out specifically for that. So there's not even place on the board to put an additional capacitor on the output of the normal channel like there is on the 68 custom, where they use the 65 reissue board, so they have the place for it. So it's difficult to revert that back to the true AB763. It can be done. If someone really wanted that done, I'd put a little terminal strip between V1 and V2, where I can mount the additional cap there, and then all of a sudden it can be made into a quieter amp. But quiet is relative. If it is quiet enough for you, that's great. I just think that for the price, you could have gotten an early 70s deluxe reverb and had something with better iron, better build, and a better sound. But if you like it, that's all that matters. I also don't like the sound of the tremolo in that compared to the Opto Trim in a true deluxe reverb. That's subjective. I'd always try to point out when something's an opinion is subjective versus objective. Because, I do invariably have to mix and match the objective and the subjective on the channel, and one influences the other. If I know that this thing sounds great, but it's probably going to catch on fire because all the resistors are pulling more current than they're rated for, it means I can't really enjoy the sound because I know it's a temporary thing. I'm not saying that in the case of that amp, but I find it crazy that Fender sells that for so much, given how much of it is PCB, how sloppy the lead dress is, and in some ways most ways it's absolutely no better than a standard 65 reissue. You can buy a standard 65 reissue, recap it, and fix the heater and screen issues, like I mentioned, for much less money than the 64 costs. And if you want to have reverb and trim on both channels, that's easily done. Rob Robinette's site has got instructions for how to do that without all the noise that Fender's method gives. Oh, Tony Fleming knew you had a Cyber Twin in for repair. I would refuse to work on a Cyber Twin. I don't think you even get parts for them. And if they are working, they sound not great. Not a fan. Never been a fan. Hopefully you have good experience with it though. I don't have. Hey, Lee Perry. I'm not familiar with the AC40. If the normal channel is only passing signal, if the input signal is X higher or more, tubes test okay. Well, it's probably either a breakdown in the bias of that amp of that tube. So you can have a bad grid leak resistor. You could have a bad cathode resistor. You could have a bad cathode bypass cap. You could have a bad plate contributing to that. But generally, if I'm getting something where it's like you have to play really hard and it's like a square wave and it cuts off, that's telling me that the grid leak is effed up. I don't know whether that's happening because of an issue with the volume pot, which goes to the next stage, or whether it's coming from the input to the normal channel's grid. But that's where to look. Is almost invariably going to be a problem in the cathode bias of that triode stage. And if you have a scope, you can see that. You can see here's the waveform at the grid, and here's the waveform on the other on the outside of the the coupling cap hung off the plate, and see what the output's looking like. And if the input's nice and curvy and the output is flat with spiky square things that only go up, that's where the issue is. Given that you've traced it to a 600 millivolt signal, it tells me you've got test gears. So almost got to be a misbiased triode. I don't have any experience with the old Royal Guardsman, Craig. I've had experience with a couple of the Thomas Organ Voxes. Is the Royal Guardsman a Thomas Organ, or is it one of the solid state JMIs? I don't recall. I think that's a Thomas Organ. The Thomas Organs that I've mostly worked on have been the Cambridge and Cambridge Reverb, which are essentially a Princeton circuit rather than anything Vox ever did. They're Princetons with the EL84s. Let's see. Hey, Blackstrap Blues. Thanks for joining us from New Zealand. I don't have any merch yet. I'm looking into T-shirt designs and all that. I also have to look into the various people who sell T-shirts. I need to get some samples from Spring. I just don't want to sell you guys a T-shirt and have it, shrink 3 sizes the first time you wash it, or have the fabric be see-through. I want to make sure it's at least a T-shirt that you would want to wear before I put any clever or attempted clevernesses or logos on it. I just don't want to be one more person selling crap in the world. So if I can find a supplier that I can work with. That you can buy a T-shirt that says, "Lyle sure likes to talk a lot, huh?" or whatever. The T-shirt's worth wearing. I don't want to sell you something just to sell you stuff. Attenuators can damage amps. Let's take this in two stages. Yeah, I don't like the Studio Classic or the J. I have not tried the JTM, but the Studio Classic and the Studio Vintage are both overpriced, plastic, fantastic, not very good. Attenuators can damage amps. Some are much more likely to than others. I think the Tone King's probably okay. I would be looking at Sir or Fryette or other brands myself, because I know that if John's putting his name on something that's going to be great, Tone King, I'd have to go through it with a fine-tooth comb before I could recommend it. There are attenuators which fail. There are attenuators which are not giving a good load to an amp and can have actually reflected frequencies which can damage things. And there are amps which there's no problem with the attenuator, it's just that you end up running the amp on 10 all the time, whereas that would be way too loud to do in practice. And so you're decreasing the normal lifespan of the tubes and sometimes components in the amp just from running it so hot, so hard, so long, where you would not do that if you're really hearing the output. I also think that in general, if you have a 100-watt amp and you're always trying to attenuate it by 30 dB, you don't need a 100-watt amp. You need to get a 30-watt amp that you end up attenuating by 8 dB, something like that, I'm not familiar enough with Iron Man Mini or otherwise to say yay or nay on that. But you always have to be careful with attenuators. I have worked on some nice consoles. I've also worked on some MCI tape machine motors and stuff. I haven't done it a lot because there have not been a lot of studios. And the studios in town that are remaining that have that stuff, they have a guy always on call for that, and I get called in for specialty stuff that he does not do. And I have no desire at this point in my life to spend a day on my back beneath a big console doing that kind of work. But I know how it's done, and it's you get a bucket of new caps and a bucket for the old caps, and you just go through it. But it's not something which happens very often in Memphis anymore, or it happens in very few places. Oh, yours an AC. Oh, you're talking about B minor on a Vox. You're talking about a Vox AC10C1. No, the Vox AC10C1 is not a Vox. And I get flack for this, and people don't understand what I'm talking about, or that I don't know what I'm talking about, or that I'm some kind of snob because I say the $400 used AC15 is fantastic, but the $300 new AC10 is junk. That's me being a snob. All right, you play a note on one of these, and the note that you play is like this, right? And then you amplify it, and it goes way up, and you got a big signal by a certain point in the amplifier because it's been amplified. And then in the AC10C1, then you turn that level way down, so instead of being here, it's here, and then you feed that into a solid state circuit that buffers it and sends out to the reverb that only has a 5-volt supply. So even the small signal that you're feeding into it it swings too hard for that to handle. They should have attenuated it more or gone to a solid state thing with a greater than a 5-volt unipolar supply, because even after the attenuation, it gets squashed and you get all kinds of ugliness in that part of this stage. And then they go through another LND 150 and amplify it back to where it was before as far as the level. But instead of being a nice waveform like this, it's all squared off and clipped. And I can't really do this in the air. I need one of those Picasso light things. But so they're just making the signal awful at one point in the circuit. If you were to take one of those things and say, all right, I'm not going to have reverb. We're going to bypass that 5-volt solid state thing completely, which means I can just skip this LND 150 and this one LND 150 and just go from the preamp to the phase inverter. Then all that headroom issue goes away. In the video I did on that, I played it, and you play hard and it just falls apart because you're running out of headroom because that's a stupid part of the supply. The other issues of that amp are that the screen resistors are way underrated. In fact, the one I had in burned, predictably. Eventual service will be expensive on that damn thing. And the speaker's a piece of shit, and there's not room to put a good speaker. And the whole thing is built insultingly bad. It's built like a pig nose, So if you can spend your money on an AC-10 that looks like a Vox but sounds like crap, has all these issues, or you can spend a little bit more, get a used AC-15, and turn the master down. You're the same place you thought you were, and you have a good amp. It blows my mind. So if you've been playing an AC-10C1, you've not been playing a Vox, and if you tried one AC-15, that was too small a sample size. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be mean. The cat's onto us, man. The cat's onto us. Yeah, 8-count audio. The 68 Princetons are the same as the 67, the same as the 66. They didn't start making any changes to the Princeton circuit. I don't think they ever really made any real changes to the Princeton circuit, but they the big change as far as we're concerned would be the wax, which started in 73. And they started using different wire in 69 and a few different soldering practices in late 68, 69, but the circuit's the same. And the transformers are the same. Some of the parts, like which caps they use, changed, but that's only cosmetic. They sound pretty much the same. Hey, Ron Carter at Wildwood Amps. Hey, Eric. Hey, Craig Flowers. I disagree with you, Craig, about 15K and Rosewood grains. First of all, 15K is not coming through your speaker. Thanks, Scott M. Steady camera shots. Thanks, Julian. Thank you, Jorge. Appreciate that. He connected the heaters direct to the sockets on a Fender Twin reissue, and the fuse blows. Can't find any shorts. Any idea why? You've got a short somewhere. If you have the heater wires on a reissue, and they're connected straight to the sockets, you either have them connected to the wrong pins. They should be connected to pins 2 and 7, or you have a short, as in 2 and 7, a stray bit of wire touching an adjacent pin, particularly the plate voltage. Or you could have, and if there are 2 wires coming from one of the octal sockets that are going to the board that we're carrying. The AC supply used to go to the PCB board, then it would go through a fuse, and then some heater balance resistors to ground, and then 2 wires going to the board. If you've disconnected the wires going to the board and move them straight to the octal socket, you can leave those 2 100 ohm resistors on the board. I prefer to remove them from the board, remove the wires from the heaters sockets, from the tube socket heater connections to the board, and then put in some new heater balance resistors on the output tube sockets themselves from pin 2 and 7 to pin 8, which is ground. But in your scenario, there is something that you have missed. And it's also possible that if you have the wires connected to the octal sockets going to the board, that one or more of the 100 ohm resistors on the board shorted for some reason. That's another reason I like to move them to the tube sockets, so that if one of them blows, it's not going to burn the board. If without clear photos of your amp, I can't spot it, but I'm pretty sure if I had a clear photo right now, I'd be like, oh, it's right there. So go through there with a magnifying glass if you need to, but you're not going to have an issue connecting the heaters to the output tubes sockets. That's not going to cause a problem if implemented correctly. Tinted speaker for a good vintage low wattage output. Warehouse and Weber are usually my choices, but it's going to depend on what sound you're trying to get. If you want as much headroom as possible, ceramic. If you want a lot of character, play with the Alnico. Just be aware of I don't know what amp you have, but like an old Champ, there's only certain speakers that'll fit in there without hitting tubes and stuff. So there's a lot of balls in the air, so to speak. Yeah, I see you there, Brad, with your recommendation for a big 10-inch Aerosmith song. Let's see. Now people are talking about guitar necks and fingerboards and such. And we're coming up to the end of the third hour. So I'm going to scroll down and make sure I haven't missed any super chats, and we're going to begin to wrap this up. And to everyone whose question, or anyone whose question I'm not getting to this time, I'm sorry. I do try to answer all of them that I can, and I try to answer them thoroughly, and those two things don't work well together. Hey, Martin from Scotland, I'm glad you joined us. If I could either I could answer all the questions if I didn't answer any of them very thoroughly. Before I sign off, and this leads me to that, what do you guys think about me doing Patreon stuff here? Here's the thing. I don't know that I could give you guys any regular special content for Patreon members or whatever. Because of time considerations. Maybe occasionally I could do a long form of something or certain things, but in general, it would just be a way of saying, well, okay, thanks to Patreons, I was able to do a longer chat session and answer more questions. Thanks to Patreon, I was able to get some new lenses and lights to make the videos better. I've got 2 really good mic pre channels and 2 really nice mics for the speakers, which means when I'm doing this kind of thing, if I'm playing video, I've got to use these little Rhodes for the player, which take a long time for me to sync everything up. It'd be much nicer if I had 4 channels of good mic pre's, so I could record everything at once, and then syncing takes less time, but that costs more money. So I'm thinking about maybe if people are liking what I'm doing, helping me get that much better with Patreon. But I don't want to be like, hey, world, give me some money. Wouldn't it be so I could buy shinier shoes? It would really be so I could make better content for you guys. And if, as the content gets better as far as the production, it takes so much more time to put them together. And I'm making sure I haven't missed any super chats, speaking of money grabbing. And, I'm debating it. I've never felt right about, I don't even feel right about merch that people want it. And I've never felt good about asking about Patreon. In fact, I rejected it out of hand for a long time, but I've spent so much money growing the channel, and I continue to, and the channel brings in a certain amount of income, but not enough to justify buying a $3,000 camera. Meanwhile, I'm competing with channels that have that. I mean, if you look at, say, just in the guitar world, the gear that's used to record the stuff for Paul David's videos is insane. I don't think I need to get to that level of video production, but it's one of those things. I'm debating it. But what do you guys think? Would I be money grubbing son of a bitch? It's blah 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 blah. Another YouTube guy, blah blah blah. Or do you think that the increase in audio and video quality of the past, specifically year, I think I've gotten really, really tuned in within the last month or two on some certain aspects of the videos. Is that important to you? Yeah, let me know. I just don't want to. I also do give out a lot of free information, and but still, the videos are a secondary function of the business. So it's tricky. I guess I'm just embarrassed to ask about it. You don't need fancy video gear. Bukovac puts an iPhone on his kitchen table, does what he does pretty well. Yeah, but I got news for you, man. I ain't Tom Bukovac, number one. The guy's a phenomenal player. Number two, he's showing you stuff this big. I'm showing you stuff this big. So trust me, the camera increase in the last couple of years has paid off for people who watch the videos. Anyway, so if you don't like the idea of Patreon, please don't. I'm not. Everyone must pay or anything, but it's also come to my attention that there are people out there who like this stuff, who want to fund this kind of stuff. And okay, well, I think I could be funded. I could have patrons. Anyway, I can do a poll in chat. I could. I just haven't thought about it. Anyway, we are now at the third hour. We're going to wrap it up. I appreciate everyone being here as always. And for everyone whose question I didn't get to, try to get here at the beginning of the chat. So I'm much more likely to get to your question if it's earlier in the stream, because by the third hour, I'm just starting on where everyone else was on the second hour. So anyway, I want to find out if we're going to tune and calibrate that Moog. We're going to put the Lawlers in that white telly. I've got to do some final stuff on that 66 Super, and including the power cable. And then I've got some goodies that have just arrived to finish up the 66 Bandmaster. And in the other room, I've got a Drummer dual compressor thingamajigger we're going to have to go through. That's going to be fun for some of us. I know most people want the guitar amps, but there's some Drummer gear, the Moogs. There's the occasional weird things that are audio adjacent, at least. They keep me interested as well. I hope they interest you. So thanks, everyone, very much. See you next time.